They're now live.
Great, thank you. Good evening. Welcome to a work session, which will be followed by a regular meeting of the Silverton Board of Trustees. It's October 10th. The time is 6:03 p.m. and I call this work session to order. Roll call, please.
Trustee Davis.
Here.
Trustee Prinker.
Here.
Trustee Parker is currently absent. Trustee Bureau. Here. Trustee George is currently on EMS call, I believe. Mayor Pro Tem Barlow.
Here.
Mayor Pro.
Here.
All right, we have 5 in attendance and 2 currently absent.
All right, thank you very much. So this work session includes Chamber of Commerce budget presentation as well as the Sheriff's Department budget presentation. And in our agenda, it looks like Chamber of Commerce is first.
Good evening. So what I gave you in your packet was a year-to-date comparison visitor center budget from 2021 to 2022 ending in September. So comparing just budget years from last year to this year. And then I had her run the complete year of 2021. So you can see what complete 12-month cycle looks like for the visitor center. And then I'll kind of go over some highlights in that report, but just to kind of go over the memo. So some of the things you guys asked for was staffing, operation hours. Visitor center is open 7 days a week, 12 days a month, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then a few holidays we do close. We have 3 staff in the summertime that kind of split up that 7-day shift. And then we always have 2 to 3 trained floaters that can be called in as needed. When someone gets assigned to a day of the week, they pretty much own it. And so we have some folks that can step in for them. And as long as that shift is covered and that day is covered, we have consistent days and scheduling. And in the summer, in the winter, we go down to just 2 staff members splitting up that 7-day week. And then that's when we move to the 3 floaters, the 3 summer folks who are trained. Part of that, what enables us to get away with having 1 staff member in the visitor center where we used to have 2, is the continued partnership with San Juan Mountain Association. In the height of the summer, they put the Trails Ambassador. They do have a little kiosk inside, but they tend to do their tent outside. So it does get super busy and crowded and noisy in there. And it's a way for us to just give customers more access to the campus and then to go over maps and more detailed conversations with the trail ambassadors. Now that is at no cost to the town of Silverton or Chamber. That trade was when they lost their office space here in the Highlander 7-8 years ago. And they are funded by BLM and U.S. Forest Service. So BLM, U.S. Forest Service must have an advocate in the summer. They partnered with the visitor center now, I think going on 7 years, 6, 7 years. I get the pandemic, I lost like time. What's this? And they come again June through like mid-September. So that's huge. And that really saves us on that staffing cost. And quite frankly, kind of isolates those conversations with trail conversations. Trail questions are one of the #1 things we get out of that building down at the visitor center more than anything. So having that trail expert is ideal. I don't see that relationship going away anytime soon. If anything, San Juan Mountain Association has expanded that program and they're putting trail ambassadors out and about, and they even added a winter version up by Andrews Lake this last winter. Is that your heating?
Yeah.
I can go turn it off, but then it's gonna get really cold in here, so.
It's cold that I can yell.
Okay.
So that's the staffing. Again, in the winter, we have our 1 sole employee daily in there. In the summer, we get the trail ambassador. Operations manager, part of the contract of the town of Silverton with the chamber, that falls on to me personally or whoever the executive director is for the chamber. What my position is as managers of operations is manage the budget, the staff, the operating hours, the purchasing, the bills, the bookkeeper, the supplies, the bookstore, payroll, all human resource tasks. And then I do have a part-time bookkeeper. And then we also outsource our final year-end taxes. So we actually use an accountant for that. I have a bookkeeper that comes in 1 day a week, every Tuesday, about 2 to 4 hours. She does payroll, bill payable, manages all finances. That is removed from me. I just get a report. We look over that, but we actually have a bookkeeper on staff. And then I went over the partnership, the visitor center budget. So again, there's those 2 reports. And a couple of things just to highlight on those reports that stood out to me that you may have a question on is on page 2. If you go to the comparison from 21 to 22, you see that under computer program last year was 0, this year was $650. We had to purchase the upgrade of QuickBooks, the payroll, and then I got her just like a little $200 laptop to be able to run that stuff off. The desktop that we've had ever since I've been in that building finally like went out on us. So it's pretty amazing that we even had that go that long. So that was computer and QuickBooks. And then the other thing to point out is on page 3 of the comparison, telephone expenses. Because we see our copier and lease bills going up, I called CenturyLink and just haggled. We no longer have the 1-800 number. We have no need for the 1-800 number, and that was expensive. So that saved us a lot of money. We also did more bundling, removed a random 3rd line that didn't even know we had. And so that just happened only 3 months ago, and you can already see our savings. And I cut our telephone bill in half. So that'll help balance out some of our other expenses that are going to continue to increase, especially the copier. And then thirdly, as you can see, the bookstore is really what offsets the deficit of what the visitor center runs on in a red, the town giving us the 42, it actually takes up to 65. And the way we make up that difference is donations. Donations come in maybe a little around $2,000 ever since we stopped getting the water donation, ever since the water kiosk, the water donate, when we just had the hose spigot, which is a better deal for the town. So now we bring in around a couple $1,000s and just people putting money in a donation, for using the restrooms. So I also started purchasing and moving more towards gifts as opposed to books. The books stay consistent, but honestly, there's a higher profit margin on gifts. So I'm just trying to build up that bookstore. We only have so much real estate. I split with Elevation Copy. We purchased all the t-shirts and sweatshirts that Harley Davidson, when they opened up the gift shop in the Grand Imperial last summer and then closed it. So Elevated Copy and myself actually split that. We got them for like $5 and we're selling them for $30. And that just started this summer. So we're going to see a bigger profit margin off of that. And we'll see that in gifts as opposed to books. Books kind of stayed steady. And then gifts will give us again more profit margin. I brought in a couple lines that are very Silverton focused from that I had in my shop. And so we're just paying attention to the trends. We stopped buying so much more of like the candy and the can. I mean, you're making what, 50 cents, and then the mice were getting into it. And it was a nightmare. So we just kind of ended the food part of it and moving more towards gifts and Silverton related things to kind of help continue to build off that offset of what the operation costs in the visitor center. And then last but not least, my 2023 budget request. The town of Silverton always has kind of put a line item in it as long as I've had this position for the last, I say 8, I think it's 9. I'm not quite sure. I think I've been here 9 years in this position. It ended up in that 2021 41,988, but really it's 42 you put in your line item. The VC has fluctuated during my tenure from 62 to 66. 66 was last year with the high mark. And then there's always obviously that deficit, almost we're getting close to 20,000 that I got to figure out how to make up. So we're requesting in the VC budget to be potentially increased to 45 for 2023 for 2 reasons. $1,000 going towards the increase in the chamber's contract. So we do all of this management and work for $4,999.92. It breaks down to $96 a week, $416 a month. That just goes into the chamber's general fund. It does not go to me. It does in a weird roundabout way. The chamber gets that, and then I'm a salaried employee from the Chamber of Commerce. Chamber of Commerce is an independent nonprofit that is funded by business owners, grants, and fundraisers. We are requesting for you to consider to a $6,000 a year contract. That's $500 a month. That's an $84 increase. And that ends up being the $184 increase a month, $115 a week would be for management to the chamber instead of the 96. We've never requested an increase. And so we are requesting at least $1,000 increase. We also are requesting a $2,000 increase that will directly and solely go towards staff. Staff make in the range between $16 and $18, and some of them have been there as long as I have. And so it's really difficult. We could do a 50 cents or a $1 occasionally, maybe every other year. And, you know, just to create more staff retention, it's really difficult to find staff. So I'm very thankful for my staff. And especially because they're 10-year employees. We're not getting new people every year. We actually keep the same rotation within those floaters and then the main visitor center staff. So that $2,000 is taking the cost of living increase. You know, they're very part-time. They're getting 5-hour shifts. Sometimes it's 6 because they're doing cleanup and stocking. And if they are super swamped in the summer, especially in July, I asked them to not just shut the doors at 3 o'clock. And some of them, especially on the weekends, stay till 4 and 5. But we want to play that by ear. So 3 o'clock at minimum. In the summer, we mostly stay open till 4 or 5 o'clock, especially if that parking lot is full. So seeing the numbers, we're starting to see a trend of not as much of a shoulder season. For example, today we had 162 people through that door. And the bathrooms are closed because yesterday they were flooding and they're broken. So we even had a sign on the door that said no restrooms, which is one of the #1 reasons people do like to go down there. So that was interesting to me. Is it restrooms? Is it us? Susan documented about 40 turnarounds or 40 just going to the, we would have had the average of 200 this time of year. And 162 came through the door. So let's go back 5 years ago. We used to see 70, 80 this time of year. So we are seeing way more traffic come off the highway later and earlier in our seasons than we ever had before. And so in November, we're going to be lucky to service 28 to 50 people in a day, right? They're like, oh my God, I saw 30 people. They're excited about that. July, over 500. Today, 162, but we've been averaging over 200 for the height of September was 292 when I looked at the numbers today. So we're seeing bigger numbers coming off the highway, coming into the visitor center. And today was a good experience of what's just about the bathroom and what's really about the visitor center. Not only are they fielding all those people in person, they're also answering phone calls. I manage the emails, the website end. So they're taking calls. There's talking to people in the building. It is a busy job. There's very little downtime. And so that staff, I really want to advocate for them getting something of an increase in 2023. Do any of you have any questions on anything with the budget, the comparison, or anything like that in the reports and the data that I gave you? Anything more you would like for me? I know usually after going into the new year, we come back and do the tourism report, but this conversation, I really just wanted to focus on the budget.
Yeah, that was a good segue with today's numbers. How about like February, like midwinter?
So in the winter, we'll see in the upwards from maybe 60 to a little over 100. Shoulder season, which for now, shoulder season is November. We're happy, we're thrilled to see 30 come through, honestly. And then of course, 0 when there's avalanche or really high snow days. And then those avalanche days, we have to close the doors anyway. So winter 60 to 80, sometimes we can go upwards of 100 as opposed to the 500 plus in July.
And that 500 plus doesn't even count the folks at the San Juan.
No, they have their own data. Yeah, they are seeing in the upwards of 200 to 300. Sometimes those folks just go there and they don't even come into the building, or they're shared. So I don't like to really mix their data in because we could be stacking the deck, honestly, or doubling it. But they do keep pretty decent data as to their point of contacts.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a great presentation. The memo is super clear. I had a couple questions, mostly just for my understanding. So the chamber in the memo has been paid 49, 99, 92 the last 9 years, and it's being asked to increase to 6.
Yes.
And then in the P&L, the line item for the admin fee chamber is for number. It's 3749.94.
It's only this September.
Got it.
And that's why
So that's
I gave you 2021 so you could see what is a 12-month. Yeah.
I'm with you now.
Because we can only do till September.
Got it. And then similarly, do you expect the net income to be a deficit or below zero at the end of the year? Because right now we're showing positive for both years.
So here's the thing with that, right? Is some years we dip out. So we always kind of keep that little bit of reserve because then it offsets the other years. So like that 4,000, I have to, this year, we need a new point of sales. We had to buy the computer point of sale. I'm kind of trying to negotiate with Citizen State Bank. And honestly, they use a Clover and I had a Clover in my store. And so I was like, I could sell mine used to them, but we need to make sure it's compatible. So some of that money can go for like things that we actually need, like point of sales, or the year before we had to buy new telephones, or so it's kind of nice to have that little bit of a security of $2,000 to $4,000, because for so many years we were in the red. And then when we reduced the hours of operation during the pandemic, that's what kind of brought us out. And now we're kind of dipping to the green. So I like to look at it like it in a 5-year span and just make sure instead of just totally draining the hopper.
Yeah. And so the balance of the bank account year to year sits around like $2,000 to $4,000.
Yes. And just so you guys are aware, that bank account or the money that we manage has nothing to do with the chamber. We manage it. That's why you get this. We keep that money totally isolated and separate so that it's clean.
And then a question that I asked the town, this is more of like just a footnote, but a question I asked the town at our last meeting was, how are we gonna operate the Columbine Park?
Yeah.
And it seems like it would make sense to collaborate on that.
Yeah.
Figure out what's the most efficient. And so, even though your budget is limited really to the visitor center right now, I think there may be modifications when that goes live in July.
Yes.
And I would just like us all to anticipate that.
Yep. And so my question back to you guys would be like, so that'd be a staff, right? Because you have like outfitting it in a different pot of money than this. So that would be a staff member, which is something I come up like, this is what it's going to cost. It wouldn't be year round, or would it be year round, right? Do we just do the high tide as opposed to the steady 12 months down there? And then secondly, do we offset with some sales out of there, or do we not, because we're in the downtown business district? So I guess that would be what I would ask you guys to really think through. But in the end, it could literally just be adding to the staffing. And I could have the bookkeeper find out, okay, what would it cost us to put a human there? But you guys, like, my gut would tell me high tide, right? High point of contacts. In November, I wouldn't put anyone on, over in that area per se. But the main building, what comes off the highway is pretty amazing. And the recruitment that has it in town. But honestly, every community, just when you're traveling, you just know. I go to the visitor center, I know there's restrooms, I know there's someone. And then we also utilize that space as an emergency base camp, right? Because it's one of the only potable copper lines left. When we've had those fires, we have telephone and internet. We opened it up. We looked with Red Cross to drive through, to tag people. And so I would also challenge the board to really look at that campus in a bigger picture than just the visitor center, and what are other community service oriented opportunities that we could have the VC staff do like we did during emergencies.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Dana or Jordan?
I thought it was super helpful, so I didn't have a lot of questions. I appreciated the level of detail and transparency and yeah, and my biggest question was around kind of use. Like, I have no idea how many people are walking through. So it was very helpful to have any sense of context.
Yeah.
And even just what you're seeing about the shoulder season and all of that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think if there ever was a time where you're like, can you shave? I would say shoulder season, but I do have to say that the phone calls, the resource, keeping that building, we have to keep that building alive anyway. And if you really look what staff cost is more minimal, because we talked about that before. Do we shut it down? Do we do this? But you're keeping that building alive. And so I'm more of an advocate of that being 12 months. But when it comes to Blair Street, maybe there's a more fine tuning of services available there.
That's what I was gonna ask. Since you're here, what would you suggest as we look forward to planning for that area? Would you say 4-month season?
I would say at least mid-May through mid-October. Our shoulder seasons are getting thinner. That would be high tide. And then like maybe during some winter events. So it's going to be a bomber building and we want to utilize it and use it as an attraction. And so is that February? Is that during, big events? Then we put someone down there, an ambassador down there, and then figure that out year by year, right? Because we'll have data. What's your point of contact? And then analyze that the next year. But absolutely minimum Memorial Day, mid-May, look at our stats now. They're busy down there.
You think staffing would be challenging, or you think you could have the people?
Oh, God, staffing's always challenging, but yeah, we tend to hire, seniors. We tend to have very long tenure loyal, staff. Yes and no. I think if we can maybe pay a little more, it's really hard to compete with the gift shop. Gift shops nowadays, they have to pay what they have to pay to get people there. And so we do not offer a competitive pay, but with the demographic we go after for staffing, it's not necessary. It kind of works symbiotic,
Sally, any questions from Zoom land?
Yeah, sorry. Now I'm in the dark cave here, but I can hear and pay attention much better. I think Jeff asked my question and I apologize, Deanne, that I had to switch there for a second, but I was just going to see if you'd offered input on the new facility at Columbine Park and just budgeting for that. Also kind of what Jeff mentioned, the staffing or just like vision for that.
Yeah. And Sally, did you hear our conversation on that?
Yeah, I just picked up just now. So if that's it, then I'm good. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for the present.
Gloria and I can work offline to really go through the data and crunch that and, perspective and like, what would the costs be for so many months but honestly, that's just staff because it's kind of sounds like you guys are going to have a turnkey and then of course get more into the philosophy of like, okay, well, what do we want to promote? How do we want, I think there's tons of opportunities in that and, to open up more conversations with you guys to get more involved with that task.
We're likely to have a work session in the next few months.
Yeah.
Brainstorm exactly what that space will entail.
Yeah.
Great if you and the chamber were part of that brainstorm.
Perfect. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you, guys. And thank you for the consideration.
Thank you, Dean.
I still want to see the Silverton Monopoly game.
We cannot keep those
Monopoly game.
stock. We just had to order because we're scared to order this time of year because you don't want to sit on things. We cannot keep we have Silverton Monopoly games down there. and we can't keep him in stock. I was gonna promote him and the Susan's like, we're already out. I'm like, oh my God. So that's also part of the gifts, you know, where we have to get more bang for our buck with what we're actually selling down there. All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda is Sheriff's Department budget presentation. Hey, guys.
Feeling quite fortunate to not be coming before you asking for anything again this year. We're pretty much in the same budget situation for this coming year as we were this past. You'll notice a little bit of a line item increase on salaries for $7,000, and that's just what Willie puts in for cost of living bumps for the rest of the staff, not for myself. My salary is statutorily limited to what it is. One thing I noticed on this is the jail budget. It says year to date it's $455. That's a mistake. I think it's somewhere in the $5,500 range at this point. And that's something that's always a great unknown for us. We budget $20,000 for it every year. There's been years we've spent almost 40, and most years we spent about 10 or so. So it's just one of those things that we can't really have much prediction for. We kind of do our best with it. I will let you know that I'm about to sign a new agreement with our jail. If you don't know, we use La Plata County Detention Center. It has been at a rate of $65 per day for years ever since I've been involved, and it's going up on us now to 78, which isn't a tremendous increase. I think it's absolutely well worth it. There's no arguing there to be had. That's still under the national averages. So I think we're in fine shape there still, and it's just going to continue to be something we have to budget for and deal with as we get it. We did have a major expense this year in body cams. Body cams have been something that law enforcement has been directed toward, and by I think it's May of 2023, it was mandated that we have to have body cams on the department. We drug our feet on that because we couldn't really afford it for the first couple of years that they were available. There's a great deal that goes into that, not to mention the data storage and accessibility and the plans you have to purchase to be involved with that. So we were able to come up with grants this year, and we're able to get our whole team outfitted with body cams, and it didn't cost us a dime. So that was pretty exceptional, and I'll give Under Sheriff Lawrence the credit for that. We are going to be purchasing a vehicle this year, another new pickup truck, and we have funds in our escrow account that build at $10,000 per year for that already set aside. So that's nothing to add to our budgets in any way. We did make a large purchase this year. You'll notice the $9,000 or the $9,500 at the year-end estimates under miscellaneous at the very bottom of our budget there. That was new vest purchases. We have to up our vest every 5 years. They expire, and vests have gotten even more expensive than they have been in the past, and they've been expensive enough for some time. But we got some nice top of the line, lighter, cooler, easier to wear vests, which are spectacular for the team. And that was a bit of an investment this year. The most exciting news and what will affect the budget, you know, as typical, we're not fully staffed and we're budgeted to be fully staffed. So we give a pretty substantial amount of our budget back to the town and county every year. This coming year, I'm very happy to say we have made a hire. The gentleman still needs to go to academy, so he'll be starting in January, getting out in mid-May, and going into FTO, which is a 6-week to 2-month process. So he'll be on the payroll in mid-May, end of May. So for the first third of the year, we'll still be in this situation, but for the next 2/3, we're going to have one of those full-time positions being paid out. So we will have a bit more of our budgeted expended next year, and that's a really positive thing. And I'm really excited about the gentleman coming on board as well. I think that's all the major things. Not much of a presentation, I'm sorry. We're pretty simple. Anybody have any questions for me? I never got to speak with you after your ride along. How was that?
Fantastic. I mean, John Jacobs is an excellent human being, so it's a great day to spend the day with him, but it was wonderful. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Sorry, and I interrupted your question.
I was just going to ask just again, because I'm new, and so getting a historic perspective, haven't been here a year, but I was just looking at like the historic trend of the budget and like quite a discrepancy or just a significant increase over the last 5 or 6 years. And I was curious if we'd added staff or just like how that had changed over time, because I couldn't.
In the sheriff's office?
Yeah.
It's not a historical increase. We've been right at about these figures. We're at 382 will be next year's budget. We've been in that 375 ballpark for years now.
Okay, I gotcha. Yeah, it just looked, I think what I had historically was like 314 in 2016, 360 in 2017, 390, 2018, 360, 2019, and then 2020 and 2021 up to 473. I think that's the shared total budget.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm looking at salary, the salary line item, which is typically the bulk of our budget.
Gotcha.
No, there's nothing in particular that, you know, again, the cost of living upgrades have been minor for
Gotcha.
every other year or so. Sorry.
Could I venture a guess at what you're seeing?
Yeah, that would be.
So I think because it took me a minute to figure it out, but the budget relative to the projected budget versus the actual, the projected budget has included payroll for 2 additional roles that weren't filled the last couple of years, but we're still budgeting for those 2 roles.
Also includes $20,000 of jail expenditure, and we're going to be under 10 this year. So there are things that are over budgeted, if you will.
That's super helpful.
And the other thing is that
I knew there was something going on there, so that's what I was curious.
you may have also seen a trend that for a great deal of time, the budget was split 50-50 between the town and county for the sheriff's office. And it's been 5 years now, is my guess, that we went to 60-40. Still, you know, that was a big conversation at the time, but it's still an exceptional deal. We estimated about 73% of our responses are town related rather than county. So I think at the 60-40, we're still at a pretty fair deal for the town. Any need to try and up that anytime soon either. I think we're doing good at that ratio.
Yeah, I think those kind of numbers would be really helpful, just to kind of know the context and, you know, just kind of, again, like Deanne, she didn't have their memo, but articulating it, number of people walking through the door, just more information so folks know. But
at the year end, sometime by mid-January, I tend to put some numbers together for year-end totals and whatnot, and then I can compare those this past year. So I'll get those to you.
that's great. Thank you.
I really just have like a bookkeeping administration question, not a substantive one, but is there a reason that the projected budget wouldn't be adjusted, especially with the certainty of having this hire that's going to start getting paid till May, to adjust down the budget for not paying that role January, February, March, April, and then bringing the projected closer to actual?
So I think Willie's philosophy there is, and I'm speaking for Willie, and I apologize if I misquote him or misthink for him, but I think his mentality there is to not have to come back and ask for more at some point. You know, we've been budgeted for full-time staff for the last several years and haven't been there. So, you know, returning 26% of our annual budget to the town and county has been the name of the game. And I think that's where he and I feel more comfortable being, rather than having to come to you and explain to you why now I need to get back to where I was.
Got it. And Gloria, that doesn't create any problem. So like the school, I know if they don't come within a certain margin of their budget, there's like a problem with how they're budgeting, and then there's like a problem with the audit. Does the town have any type of similar issue where like total budget projections versus actual being significantly varied create any issues, or no?
I'd have to look into that. I'm not sure. I mean, typically you want to try and be balanced as much as you can and not hold on to monies that you could expend that year as a public entity, but I'd have to look into that.
Okay.
And I think there's a mentality out there, typically in government, it's, you know, use it or lose it. And people try and spend the entirety of their budget or not get it the following year. And I think you guys are well aware that's not my style. I'm pretty frugal and find our department very fiscally responsible, and we have no problem returning those funds at the end of the year. We're not doing a spending bonanza at the end of every year trying to use up our budget.
Cool. I mean, I think this board has been very supportive of emergency services and other like necessary infrastructure. And I was just looking at it entirely from like an administrative question of like, should it be closer? And then should we just ask for more, bump it up, you know, understanding that you are projecting out for 2 additional roles, one which is now going to get filled. And I didn't know the answer. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Any other questions for me? Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. So we have a 22-minute.
Well, I just wanted to just ask some trustee direction after this work session to adjust the budget accordingly. So you guys can give me direction on the chamber's budget and the sheriff's budget. or discuss how we would like to manage those. But yeah, then we'll have like, what, 15 minutes between.
And my take was that the chamber's ask was reasonable for the increase of, you know, $1,000 in the chamber's pay since it hasn't changed in 9 years, and then 2,000 for cost of living increases for staff.
But it kind of seems like we need to think bigger picture with Columbine Park.
Yeah,
I think we even need to think bigger picture than that.
Yeah, for sure.
Think about the visitor center campus
Oh, yeah.
and what that will entail and how we want to split those services. And we do need to like identify kind of a plan for that area eventually.
I'm curious also, and this is that like more brainstorming, a bigger picture, but do other towns like operate more of their visitor center with the chamber more focused on like marketing and business resources? Or is the scope of the chamber's contract pretty normal? And should we be, as we do Columbine Park, transitioning more of these services under town staff so that the chamber can be more focused on like marketing and PR? But I don't know the answer to that. But I think that looking into this next year without any plan in place for those changes, that their asks seemed reasonable. Jordan or Sally?
No, I would agree. Their ask seems definitely within reason. Yeah, it's hard to make any assumptions about what's going to happen with that area or connecting it to Columbine Park without sitting down and talking about it for a while. I'm good with where we're at.
Yep, same. Thank you.
And there's an interesting comment about if you know that your personnel is going to be so much less, but I can also see that where then having to come back and be like, I need a $40,000 increase. That's a big ask versus like, I'm going to give you $50,000 back. But that's an interesting.
That's switching over to Sheriff.
Yeah, cool. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah.
I realized that I had a material question I forgot to ask, which is it doesn't have any income line items. And I was just curious if like fines written is something that is collected by a different entity and that's why they're not there. Like when he hands in a ticket or when the department hands in a ticket for a collection, like a parking ticket or a moving violation or other things, like where does that income show up? And what's the difference between like tickets written income that's not collected and actual collected income?
Gloria and I already have a plan to calculate the difference there between tickets collected and tickets written.
So it does come to the town,
Okay.
first one.
They do come to the town if it's a municipal tickets, like if it's a parking ticket, OHV tickets, any one of those like $300 or less fines, anything more than that goes up the county level.
Right. So the sheriff's department would know what they've written, but they wouldn't necessarily know it's collected because that's what we're getting that. And do we have
We have a spreadsheet for our tickets that we collect from the sheriffs.
got it?
And that spreadsheet should be done probably by Monday because the sheriff and I will be meeting over that. So.
Yeah, I had a question about that too. It's just like there was zero revenue. You know, we can see how much books are selling for at the visitor center, but
So if you want to see our revenue, you would look at our budget
for fines.
for fines.
Yeah. Yeah.
So good on the chamber discussion. Okay, so sheriff discussion.
The only thing I was wondering on the sheriff discussion is, I don't know, maybe this is it is more of a process question, but I guess it looks like, you know, if we kind of keep continuing along the way, you know, sort of same as last year, that this, you know, having Bruce come and share the budget works. I just wondered if there was any need to involve or include Willie in these conversations for like, I don't know if there were like bigger capital. Oh, I just lost my light. Capital investments or, I don't know, like a longer term need, or I don't know, just looking at like, since, Willie and Bruce are working so closely on this, that it may be nice to have them both come and share.
I think
Or maybe it
that's-
doesn't matter at all. I'm just throwing it out there.
I think along those lines, similar to what we talked about our last work session, of just a little bit more for our shared services, having more of a shared meeting with the county where we just talk about the whole picture, the whole budget. I really like the idea. I can't remember who came up with it, but Gloria, you were talking about like common reporting, you know, because then we all, all the partners that we partner with know what they're filling out every year and what's helpful for us to see. So I love going down that route of a little bit more standard process.
And from that conversation, we are working on a common reporting outline to present to the finance committee in November.
That's great.
I think I'd be curious to hear from you or your budgeting mentors about this like pretty significant financial discrepancy between projected and actual. And, you know, based on the number of years that we've continued that, understanding that Willie's preference is to keep the dollars earmarked and allocated for more service. Like, it seems like unless we find a seasoned professional to hire, which I don't know what the likelihood of that, but unless we find a seasoned professional based on Bruce's timeline that he just gave us, that's nearly a 6-month time frame between hire to being on payroll. So it seems like we don't need to necessarily we certainly don't need to have 2 roles unfilled, 100% budgeted for every year this time of year. It seems like most we would need is half of whatever the empty roles would be. So it seems like we, at the very least, could bring this to closer to actual.
Okay.
And even more so with this hire, like, I guess the question to Willie and Bruce would be, is there any possibility of hiring somebody that would start getting paid before May, in addition to the unfilled role? Because I think we could just we could budget for 60% of the hired role based on when they'll be on payroll and 50% of the unhired role, and still probably have excess budget.
I can ask those questions.
And I don't know what the right thing to do is there, but just from a non-municipal finance background, that seems like a reasonable idea.
We'll do some research and get back to you on that.
Cool.
Is that like a tentatively updating the budget with these numbers and then coming back for questions? Okay.
I mean, it seems also easier, like we tentatively have a draft with too much and then we make it less. It's easier than going the other way, I imagine.
Definitely.
And then I guess a tangent related to this is, are we looking at some type of other like new role in the town for, I know that anything dealing with moving violations requires like all of the certifications and licenses and training that a deputy has. But we talked about like a parking enforcement officer. But if not that, something else that may reduce this proportion of time that the sheriff's department is spending in town that could affect the budget in the next 12 to 18 months. That's just another question.
We are exploring some ideas right now. I don't think any of them have legitimacy yet.
Cool. So the most prudent thing to do would be to plan for status quo.
Yeah, for 2023.
Great. Anything else? Sally? Okay. Any
I'll
other?
hold a candle up for you or something, yeah. No, that was.
Well,
great.
you guys, I'll just tell you since we have a few minutes here. So the internet at our cabin is great all day. My kids totally do like Zoom lessons and Zoom, it's fine. And then the second I go to get on a meeting, it's just horrible. And so I came over to the guide cabin where the internet is much better, but it's a super full night here with like, 4 of Mike's bosses are in town for the next 2 weeks and they're all staying here. And so I feel a little weird just going in and like having my meetings. So now I'm out in the truck. So that's the update on what's happening.
Nice.
That's dedication, Sally.
To
That's
be
dedication.
perfectly honest about, the reality. No, I don't know if it's dedication. I don't know what it is, but it's all right. It's not my first meeting that I've done in a truck.
So we've got about 11 minutes until the next meeting. Should we adjourn this work session and then come back in 10?
Yep.
Okay, work session adjourned. See everybody in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Great.
For those that would like to do the Pledge of Allegiance, let's go ahead and do that now.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, good evening again. Welcome to a regular meeting of the Silverton Board of Trustees on October 10th, 2022. The time 7:01 p.m. I call this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Trustee Davis. Here. Trustee Cranker.
Here.
Trustee Harper is not here at the moment. Trustee Bierman.
Here.
Trustee George. Here. Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Here.
And Mayor Furman.
Here.
6 present, 1 absent.
Great, thank you. All right. Do we have any staff or board revisions to tonight's agenda?
I do not.
Excellent.
The staff does not.
Any board revisions? Okay. So we will now open up the meeting to public comment. We'll start with any in-person comments and then move to Zoom comments. If you're on Zoom, click the raise hand button and we'll get to you after the in-person people. Any in-person public comments this evening? Okie dokie. Looking to Zoom now. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment and move on to the first item on our agenda, 3A, presentations and proclamations, community health assessment presentation by Trustee Dana Cranker.
I'm
Not in her trustee role.
Off and now put on my public health hat. Yeah, so I'm Dana Cranker, again, speaking as a representative from public health as opposed to as a trustee. My background is in public health, so I've been coordinating with Becky since about January to complete a state required community health assessment. So I'd love to share the results with you all. And as you know, most of the budget related to health falls under the county, but I just think this is particularly relevant as we think about how our health is affected by a variety of things that impact our residents here in our community in town and thinking about any future investments. And you'll see there's a variety of things related to health that are not just, the shot you get at the public health or your checkup. So Matt, thanks for running my slides. If you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. All right, so the community health assessment, it's a requirement from CDPHE. Every 5 years, public health agencies are required to do this. Our last one was 7 years ago, but the pandemic happened, so that's why we're a little later. And really, it is a state requirement, but it's also a chance for us to really think about the top priorities for our community and what are ways and resources that we can address those priorities. This report has gotten approved by the county commissioners. So this is our official community health assessment, but it's informative for you. Next slide, please. All right, so to collect the information, we did a bunch of interviews, focus groups, key stakeholders that we chatted with, and we talked about some of those priorities. What are your top health priorities? What do you think makes a healthy community? I think relevant for the town board, a top thing that came up unprompted when I asked people what makes a healthy community was like getting along with your neighbors. It was very much related to civic health, which was interesting, even though folks knew that I was talking to them about health care and health services. What makes a healthy community to most residents that I talk to in Silverton is a healthy connection with each other. So that was interesting. Next slide, please. All right, so 3 priorities really emerged. And I have to say, these didn't change a lot from the priorities 7 years ago. So when we did this 7 years ago, it was right after the Gold King mine spill. So keep that context in mind. There were 5 priorities that really surfaced back then. It was access to care, still there, mental health and substance abuse. We've now lumped that into behavioral health. Senior services, so both social and healthcare services, and then environmental health. And environmental health kind of changed in the narrative since the Gold King mine spill, and so that kind of came out. But we lumped these into these top priorities. Access to care still remains at the top.
Behavioral health felt like a more useful way to talk about how people were referring to mental health and substance use in the community. And then healthy living, we'll get into that. I think those are really key areas where the town has connections to them. Next slide. All right, so we're going to go through each priority. The main finding here was that people would use more services if they were here. Over and over and over, I heard from people, and it was supported by data I got from CDPHE, that people are not using services, getting the care that they need because it's hard. It's a pain in the butt, right? You know, you have to go to the doctor, you gotta go to the dentist, take a whole day off work, dollars in gas just to get to and from Durango. And it's prohibitive. If you have a salary job, it's inconvenient. If you have an hourly job, it's very cost prohibitive. And people really are delaying or forgoing getting checkups, following up on certain procedures because of lack of access here. And we are one of the most medically underserved counties in Colorado. All right, next slide, please. This was interesting information. You know, as many of you probably know, it's hard to get quantitative data that's particularly relevant because if an agency does a survey in San Juan County or Silverton, you know, our sample size is 2 people. But really what CDPHE was able to do was to combine multiple years of some of our risk factor surveys that have been done and that are done nationally. So these are very standardized surveys, very reliable. And I consulted with my resident statistician that lives in my home, and he thought this method was incredibly accurate and the way that you would do it. So what you can see here, San Juan County is the dark blue. And what's really interesting, I think, about this is this tells the story that people are not delaying care because of cost. They're delaying care because of access. So on the left, you see we're actually higher than the state and the region. The region is the baby blue color. We're higher than the state and the region for health coverage. So more people in San Juan County have coverage than the region and the state. We're also low on the number of percent of adults who delayed healthcare because of cost, quite low, right? But you can see that we're higher for the percentage of adults who did not have a medical checkup in the last year. So people are delaying care, but it's not necessarily due to cost or to health insurance coverage, which is an interesting story in this data. And actually that I would say played out in how people talk to me about it. Cost didn't come up that often, except when you're talking about the cost to get to somewhere to have medical care. Next slide, please. This is really what came up as far as what people were looking for, what community members are looking for. Sustainable, expanded primary care services, periodic screenings. You know, we used to have a health fair that came up as people talking about one main way that they got just regular screenings or checkups that, you know, people are not looking for seeing a specialist here. They're not looking for having 5 days a week of a provider, but there was a lot of indication that what we currently offer may not be enough. I think something that comes up here is the Silverton Clinic. There was a lot of great praise for what the Silverton Clinic offers. There were just a lot of comments about it's not enough. You can't get an appointment. You know, you don't always get sick on a Thursday. And so I think there's some real benefits there. And it came up as a real asset for our community, as the Miners Hospital did as well, that's finished and has space for services. But what we're actually providing is not meeting the need. I think another point here to mention is that the Silverton Clinic patients, 95% of them have health coverage, and it's a free clinic. So the county and Mercy Medical Center are not really recouping the costs for what that clinic is taking to operate. So we're kind of leaving money on the table for what we could offer for health services because we're not charging insurance that the patients actually have. And it came up a little bit with community paramedicine. I've chatted with Tyler about this, just this approach that we have a really excellent team here. We're trying to fund it better. Could we use them during their downtime for some of these kinds of screenings, checks, just capitalizing on that skill set a little bit more effectively in our community. All right, next slide, please. All right, so now on to behavioral health. There were lots of interesting comments about our skiing and mining culture and how that relates to lots of drinking and fun times. This is data again from CDPHE. And I think what's interesting is you see on those dark blue bars that our binge drinking rates are higher. Our number of adults that are smoking cigarettes are higher. And the percent of adults who've ever been told they have a depressive disorder or been diagnosed with depression is higher. And, you know, I've chatted with some folks who said, well, the region's pretty not great as well. And I think this is just a pretty stark example of some of the challenges we might face in our community, both culturally and just factually. Next slide, please, Matt. Thank you. I think something to really remark on is that even though we have maybe some of these substance use challenges, we have certain rates of depression and isolation that we see in the small mountain community, the county and the community has invested pretty well in mental health over the years. The county's been supporting a mental health provider since the 80s. Recently, we now have free mental health care provided through public health. The school has highly prioritized behavioral health and mental health support. So it's still a high need, and we're seeing some successes with what we're providing. Something that came up a lot as actually a silver lining of COVID is that it kind of taught us it's okay to not be okay, and it decreased the stigma a bit around behavioral health and accessing a therapist or accessing services. And I think that's a benefit for our small community because stigma did come up in the interviews around people, you know, they don't want to have their car parked next to the therapist's office and be seen accessing those services. And telemedicine was a big benefit we saw since COVID, both for primary care and for behavioral health. Some of our challenges remain. It's still expensive, right? We do a sliding scale for a lot of our providers for mental health and behavioral health services. If you're driving to a psychiatrist, if you're seeing a provider outside of this area, transportation is challenging. For our Spanish-speaking, our Mexican community, there's like one Spanish-speaking behavioral health provider in the whole region. So that is a real challenge for folks that need to access services in Spanish. And there's not really regional treatment centers for substance abuse. And that was something that came up. Next slide, please. Okay, so the third priority is healthy living. This was just related to a lot of stuff that people talked about what kind of makes quality of life good or poor here in Silverton, especially related to natural environment, built environment, and environmental health, and kind of our connection to each other. So the things that came up here were housing. You guys know we've made it a top priority, right? If people are having to make trade-offs with housing and healthcare, right? They need a stable place to live. They may not necessarily have the extra income to invest in whatever healthcare services they need. So housing came up. And a lot of these were talking about social determinants of health, and that's kind of a buzzword out in the public health world, but it really refers to those things that affect people's health, but aren't directly related to their blood pressure or a certain medical diagnosis that they have. Air quality came up. Environmental health was a big factor in the last assessment that we did, and it kind of got talked about differently because we didn't have the Gold King mine spill right on everybody's mind when we did this assessment. But air quality definitely came up as far as, you know, dust from our dirt streets, and there was talk that it's gotten better in town since we don't have OHVs driving in town, but that out in the county it's still significant and really causes a lot of even long-term harm. And we're not mitigating it maybe as well as we should be, and also air quality in the winter related to wood burning stoves. And I think we can do more to monitor, and Becky's been working on some programs to make that a little bit more effective, and we can see trends over time. Physical activity came up. So the same data that I showed you for, you know, we might drink and smoke a lot. The good news is that our obesity rates are a lot lower than other parts of the region in the state, and our physical activity is a lot higher. So I think that's not shocking to all of us, right? And so physical activity came up as something that people value as being a part of this community, easy access to nature, to being active, to moving their body. I think on the flip side of it, some of our natural environment creates challenges for seniors and those with mobility challenges. And that came up when we think about the built and the natural environment. Our sidewalks and streets are not super accessible. Our municipal and county buildings are not always super accessible. And so just thinking about both our residents and our visitors, we have easy access to walking, and yet we don't, right? People are walking in streets. They're not necessarily able to walk all the way down Green Street with complete uninterrupted sidewalks if they have a wheelchair or something like that. And issues for seniors came up a lot in regards to the built environment, just the increased needs that seniors have living here. And Shane, you brought this up at our last meeting, but how do we facilitate structures for seniors to age in place? You know, how to help them deal with the wintertime, snow, ice concerns, and someone has a fall and now they're having to have physical therapy and be transported. There's just this cascading effect from things that happen in the built and natural environment here. And it also came up for youth. Youth and seniors share actually similar needs in regards to kind of transportation, social connection, isolation. And so when we're thinking about some of our needs for seniors, it's not that dissimilar to some of our needs for our youth. And youth common causes for some of the other challenges, whether it's substance use or depression, was isolation and mental health challenges. And so I think we can think about those when we're thinking about what environment are we creating for our youth and our seniors here for social connection, and also just for how they have spaces to go and places to access. Access to healthy foods. We are a food desert. Our grocery store does they try to do a great job. We have our farmers market, we have produce stands, people have gardens, but we still have a challenge having consistent, affordable access to healthy foods. And so this came up certainly, and our social services tries to support it with the commodities distribution and all of that, but just regular consistent access to fresh fruit and produce is challenging. And then social services came up for our community, our size. We have pretty decent services, but I think need to make sure those services stay in place, whether it's, you know, snow shoveling for seniors, some of our senior supports, and making sure that those who are eligible for things like WIC are enrolled, those who are eligible for SNAP are enrolled, and make sure they know what people in town know what services are available to them. A lot of folks don't always know they can qualify for energy assistance. Even some seasonal workers, you might think, well, I have a full-time job in the summer, but actually, depending on your income, you can qualify for energy assistance and some of the other programs. I think too, there's more we could leverage here. Our social services department is not always at regional stakeholder meetings or tables, or leveraging maybe all the grants that might be out there. So we could be leaving money on the table for social services. And organizational infrastructure. This came up and people might be like, how in the world does this relate to health? But I think when we think about stability at town hall, stability at the county, kind of organizational support for our various nonprofits and groups, stability at the school, all these things do impact how people experience their lives in Silverton and San Juan County. And they impact what people can access and what programs continue and what institutional knowledge is in place and carries forward for new programs we might implement. So that's organizational infrastructure. Next slide, please, Matt. Thank you. So what are the next steps? So I said the Board of Health approved this. We submitted to CDPHE, but really it becomes a working document. You'll see in the report that's in the packet, there's some tables at the end that kind of show what are our successes that we can celebrate, because we do have a lot of successes for a community of our size. And then what are the gaps? And so how can we start leveraging funding, leveraging organizations, and leveraging whatever we have to work on the gaps. So the real next step is to write a public health improvement plan. So I'll be staying on part-time with public health to work on that. And again, it's a document we have to write, but it's really more about saying, how can we move some things forward and actually implement programs, projects, things that address these priorities that came up. And really working on some low-hanging fruit. We don't have to have our plan all formalized before we can actually start making some progress. The health fair came up a lot, more screening opportunities. What the school provides really serves children pretty well, right? The school provides well child checks a couple times a year. Kids can get dental screenings twice a year and cleanings. And multiple adults were like, why can't we get what the kids get, right? They're doing really great over there. And we'd love to have that available to us as well. So looking into that more for children, thinking about senior and youth programming, some of those overlaps and those unique needs. Really thinking about sustainable primary care. If the clinic morphs or isn't quite that, what else is it? And promoting the behavioral health services that we have and the investments we made there. All right, so I want to leave you with a few quotes. If you could go to the next slide, please, Matt. We'll go to the next one. You guys heard the priorities. So these were some really neat voices, I think. It's hard to get an appointment here at the Silverton Clinic because it's such a well-utilized resource. Not all illness happens on a Thursday. This was my favorite. We can get a marijuana joint up here, but we can't get a prescription. Silverton isn't a nice place for people as they get older. It's okay to not be okay. That was referring to kind of the change during COVID to reduce the stigma around mental health services. COVID brought out the crazy in all of us. And so I think it's becoming a little less abnormal to get behavioral health services. We do have some very talented, educated paramedics up here that no one even knows about. So why aren't we utilizing them more? The heartbeat of the community is the school. There's a level of trust and confidence in the public health process that maybe people just weren't too aware of more than 2 years ago. And I think that is something we can really celebrate as a community. The level of engagement in the response to COVID, our vaccination rates, our testing rates, this was unheard of for many communities similar to us. And I think that goes back to when folks said what they really value in a healthy community is connection. I think we saw in the pandemic response that we did have this connection to each other. So I'm going to leave you with the last quote. Go to the next slide, please, Matt. Little things are going to add up to big things. So, you know, little steps with a health screening might actually catch someone's potential for heart failure or something like that. So this is where we can leave it. Yeah, but I'm open to any questions and comments or anything that stood out to you or you're like, yeah, I don't believe that at all.
Thank you, Dana, for putting that together. That's definitely super helpful and informative. And thank you, Mark and Becky and Amy and Anthony for being here. It's awesome. It's a lot to take on. I guess the question I have is, what can the town do to help us achieve these goals as quickly as some of our other infrastructure and development related goals?
Well, I think there are things we are already doing, especially for the priority under healthy living, right? As we think about town code, as we think about affordable housing, as we think about long-term diversifying our economy, all of those things do have impacts on health and healthcare. So I think that's a real key role for the town. And I think paying attention, especially to our needs for youth and seniors, really stuck out to me, because even though they weren't like this common theme, you'll see in the report, issues related to youth and seniors just kind of were cross-cutting, right? They came up in all of these areas when you're talking about access to services, access to what youth and seniors need socially, and just what they're trying to access here in the community and outside of it. And so I think as we, as trustees, think about senior services, youth services, to me, I think that's a useful lens. And I think keeping the lens of social determinants of health. What are the policies that we're implementing? What are the things we're funding that do have effects on the social determinants of health? And, you know, I know the clinic came to us for some funding, so then we provided that. So just ways to think about how we can utilize our funding well to leverage the services that we do have more at a county level. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Or made me think that, since Anthony's here as well, that maybe we should consider allocating a portion of the affordable housing that we're committed to doing in some percentage to senior housing, or at least just exploring what that would look like.
Making note of that.
Yeah.
Or for a medical professional.
Yeah, I was going to ask, can we set aside a portion of that, a percentage of that for healthcare professionals to live? Because that was one of the biggest problems that we ran into when we had to hire recently, was move up here, and we couldn't really help them with housing.
I think that we can look into that there's room for that in the model that we have right now that's been put together. Corey and I'll follow up on that.
Great.
And I know that you said it's required by the state to do every 5 years, but it's just such an important document for us, and
Yeah.
you know, for Becky and everybody else in health and human services to be able to look forward and know what we're going to come up against rather than just reacting. And yeah, it's invaluable for us, and we're very, very pleased. Really, really good job. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to share it. And I think, again, there's successes we can celebrate. The fact that we've invested in mental health so heavily, and there's still additional needs. And thinking of some of the stuff the school has implemented really successfully. Obviously, serving kids is different than adults, but just thinking of things that we can do of folks that have done things well and how we can leverage that. And really getting a sense of what are the needs, because I could sit in a room and make it up, but until we actually talk to folks about what they're actually looking for, I think that helps us know where our dollars can be best spent or our thinking can be best utilized.
The point you brought up about the fact that 95% of the patients have health insurance, but it's still a free clinic. And it seems like even collecting on the insurance with keeping it, waiving copays to keep it free seems like a really awesome opportunity to recoup the cost. Is that something that's moving forward or just kind of like currently in the, oh, this is an interesting fact, we should look more into it?
Yeah, I think the Silverton Clinic is definitely looking at ways to be more sustainable. I think they have a couple organizational limitations on how they could restructure themselves. So I think that's something to think about. We did have a meeting with Access Health Systems from Durango, and one of their senior guys came up and chatted with us, and he was very open to the potential of offering health services here in Silverton a couple days a week even. And Access, many people in Silverton associate Access with crisis services, but they actually offer integrated care. So they could do behavioral health, dental care, and primary care. And they are a federally qualified health clinic, which means that it's more sustainable for them to charge Medicaid and Medicare rates and still be financially sustainable. And so they were very open to being a partner. I think they didn't want to be a poor partner with the clinic, right? If the clinic is operating here, it's challenging for them. They don't want to be a competitor per se. So I think there's more partnership opportunities that could be explored, or a reformation of the clinic just to see how we could provide services effectively. And the miners union is an amazing resource. Most small communities like us, if they were trying to expand services, would not have a standalone hospital that is ready for any provider. I mean, we have an x-ray machine over there. We have all kinds of options.
So how does a miners hospital relate to figure one, access to healthcare, which shows San Juan and County is the only two counties in the state without a hospital or a clinic? Well,
Because the way health professionals are counted, we have a health professional shortage, right? Is that nurse practitioners and PAs are not counted per se, or they're given a much smaller percentage of weight as opposed to having an MD. They're trying to change that, especially for rural communities. So currently in that map, our clinic, which is staffed by a nurse practitioner, that doesn't even come up in the data. But technically, if you see in the related to that, even with the services we have, we could still stand to gain a day of coverage. And our current health provider, the nurse practitioner, she sees just based on how the clinic functions, and they don't have electronic medical records. So that creates a lot of challenges with charting. Her capacity in a day is about half what a typical provider would see with kind of a full staffed or a full patient panel for the day. So that map is basically not counting the Silverton Clinic, and it doesn't count the hospital because it's not an operating hospital.
Well, I think so.
So Dina, thanks. Sorry. Something I saw in the report, which by the way, I just would love to lift this report up and kind of give it a huge round of applause, because I think it's a really important document, and you guys it's just great. You have a great team going over there, and you did an awesome job on this, Dana and Amy and Becky, and I'm not sure who to credit, but it's really well done. It also seems very well aligned to our master plan. So someone with some knowledge of that maybe has worked on it, but or maybe that's just kind of the state of things. But I noticed in the report that it says that the clinic operates under a pro bono license, and that's part of what makes, I don't know. I guess I just had a question about that license, and if that's something that's beneficial to the clinic and the community, or if that's something that it kind of gets in the way of the sustainability, or maybe that's not as much of a factor as it sounded when I read it, but maybe you could speak to that for a minute.
Yeah, thanks, Sally, for raising that. I think if we're just going to pause for a minute on the Silverton Clinic, I think a couple things to reflect on. You know, the brokering started this about 12 years ago, and they had a real heart for providing a free clinic in this community. And it's a real testament for what they've provided over the last 10 to 14 years when there wasn't a lot of healthcare coverage. There was not the Affordable Care Act. People were not able to access the same level of care. And so I think we need to recognize that contribution and really the heart that went into opening and starting and offering this free clinic, securing the nurse practitioner's time. But Sally, the way it's been articulated to me is that they're operating under Dr. Brokering's pro bono medical license as the medical director, which oversees the clinic. He's not providing care there, but his license is covering the clinic. And if they're operating under a pro bono license, they can't bill insurance or recoup costs from patients. That's the way it's been explained to me. There may be someone that.
Yeah, well, sorry to interrupt, but I did a little research because I met with their board as well. And the designation free clinic means that you're not allowed to charge insurances either. I don't know if it's directly linked to the doctor, the medical director's license or not, because we thought that they might be able to use the same model that we have, which is bill insurance. And then if it's a local person, you know, help them with the rest or write off the rest. But yeah, because it's a free clinic, you're not allowed to charge insurance, which I feel like maybe the insurance companies had something to do with that, but.
It might have been an effective way to set it up, you know, when it was established as a 501c3. I think there's a couple structural challenges here. Medical license, you know, Lois McKenzie is the nurse manager. She would like to retire. And again, to your point, Tyler, it's hard to find folks that would take that on. And then Agnes right now, the county funds most of Lois's salary and provides the free space. And then Agnes, the nurse practitioner, her salary comes donated from Mercy. And so it's not clear if Agnes retires, would that continue? And so there's a couple of sustainability challenges, I think, there, but while still recognizing a significant contribution that the clinic's made for the past decade or more.
One more question. What you said in the report, it says that the majority of our people have coverage, but they don't access it. What portion of that was due to their inability to get like transportation to Durango or Montrose? Because I know that, you know, certainly some folks rely on us for transportation, and I'm not sure if the town can contribute to helping with some sort of shuttle service or something, but getting people, you know, to see a primary care provider before it becomes emergent is huge.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was, I don't remember seeing many statistics on that, but were we able to meet that out sort of and figure out how much of the people that didn't see a doctor, it was due to their inability to travel?
Yeah, we don't have it in the data, but it was a very common theme in the interviews. I mean, it came up all the time, transportation, either just because it's hard and inconvenient or gas is expensive, or just simply, you know, if you're a senior and you don't want to drive that pass in the middle of winter, you're stuck. And so I know Carrie Metzler, we've had some really great success with the Area Agency on Aging being established. Carrie has really done an amazing job with that AAA and providing more services to seniors. And she's partnering with the school to utilize one of the school vehicles to provide some transportation. But again, I think there's still need there for sure. And if we could bring some mobile bus, I mean, the vaccine bus has been a great example, but if we could do some buses that do screenings or do dental cleanings, just some things that could be more standard, regular screenings or preventive care here, I think could be good bang for our buck. And then, yeah, transportation came up all the time. Any other questions? Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Matt, can you promote
Thanks to Becky for letting me do this.
and Rachel?
All right. The next item on our agenda is 4A, new business Brownfields grant application.
So there's an opportunity for the town to apply for a Brownfield grant to pay for the environmental assessment phase. 1 and 2 of the Zanoni property, as well as some other properties. And community builders and Colorado Brownfields Partnership have been helping us tackle this grant and is online to do a short presentation to you all about the grant. Hi, Brooks. Hi, Rachel.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see everyone again. You thought you were rid of me, but I'm still here. Now just with my Colorado Brownfields Partnership hat on. And I wanted to introduce Brooks, my colleague here, and he can give a quick little introduction about himself before we jump in.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Brooks Coles. I'm based in Carbondale, but work with the Brownfields Partnership. I add capacity and technical assistance to communities that are seeking or implementing these brownfields resources. And that's exactly what we hope to do with you guys. And we'll give a really short presentation on where we are today and then open it up for questions. We can get everybody on the same page.
Great, thank you.
All right, can everybody see that?
We can.
Great. So yeah, thank you so much for inviting us today as the Colorado Brownfields Partnership. So a little bit of background. CBP is a statewide collaboration between community builders and the Colorado Department of Health and Environment. So CDPHE, you'll hear us say that quite a bit. And we offer expertise on the brownfields and how they can spur revitalization throughout the state. And we work with the community leaders. We've been working with Gloria and Anthony, providing technical planning and financial resources. So just a little bit of background. You guys have some of these things in your packet. Just a little bit of background on what a brownfield is. Just wanted to review that. But a brownfield is a property that's left abandoned or idled that has the presence or potential presence of environmental contamination. So even just the potential there can make it a brownfield. So top examples of brownfields are like an old factory or a gas station or a historic building that might have asbestos in it. But a brownfield can take on many different shapes. So landfill or a train station, or even a vacant lot that might have underground contaminants in it as well. And a lot of brownfields are not known brownfields until you try and sell it. And so through that due diligence and doing assessments, that's when you might be able to find that environmental contamination. And these pictures here, you guys are probably all well aware that the Annabelle subdivision in Silverton was originally a smelter site, which was purchased and redeveloped into the affordable housing development that it is today. So it's a great example of a brownfield right in your community. So if you had scrolled all the way to the bottom of the master plan, in the appendix, this exists all the way down there on page whatever 170. But this kind of standalone is showing that the visioning and goal setting part of the Compass project, it began with a brownfields redevelopment and revitalization workshop in 2019. And that kind of from that stemmed the Compass project. So you are all aware of the extensive process that the Compass project did, the vast community engagement, the depth of the master plan. So throughout that process, we identified multiple brownfield sites that are ripe for redevelopment. And so this document tracks that continuous reference back to brownfields throughout the master plan process and throughout the master plan itself, and then sets the stage for implementation and the grant that we are about to discuss. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Brooks.
Thanks, Rachel. You can go ahead and I think skip to the next slide. Yeah, and this is CBP or Colorado Brownfields Partnership kind of standard action steps for addressing brownfields. And the main point of this slide is for you guys to pat yourselves on the back and understand that you are a lot further along than a lot of communities. Just in the early process of this, working with Anthony and Gloria and community builders, it's pretty clear and motivating on my end to see that you guys have a great master plan. You seem to have some really good community alignment on the, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought I heard something. On the envisioning, learning, and identifying piece of this process. The next steps typically, depending on the size of the community, would involve some planning work, some assessment work, which would then allow you to go towards cleanup and the ultimate repurposing or revitalization. But yeah, you guys have set yourselves up very, very well for starting to pursue some of these EPA grants, which we can talk about on this next slide. And I was supposed to lead into what is a very big difference this year, and part of the reason that Anthony, Mark, lots of the folks at CDPHE are excited about jumping on this year and getting the ball rolling. And that is something you probably all know about, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that was passed this year. The bottom line of this in bold should be that there's just a lot more money out there for a lot of things, but including brownfields revitalization. So the law provides $1.5 billion in additional brownfield funding over the next 5 years. That's the largest single investment the U.S. has ever put into brownfields. And most importantly for Silverton and other communities that do have environmental contamination issues or mining history, 1.2 billion of that will be put towards grants over the next 5 years. And I know you guys have some background with the Superfund and having had brownfield workshops and obviously this master planning process. But on the federal level, to go and pursue some of the larger dollar amount grants that will allow you to do some pretty significant projects, those are really can be divided into 3 major grant types: assessment grants, cleanup grants, and multi-purpose grants. And you guys have some professionals. I think Mark Rudolph is there in the room, who's worked closely with Anthony, who really, has done this for decades, Doug Jameson as well, and thinks you guys are incredibly well suited to go after a multi-purpose grant, which is the next slide to talk about. Yeah, so rather than going through all the grant types, what we are thinking of pursuing is the multi-purpose grant. So as of this year, the maximum dollar amount that you can go for any community is $800,000. That gets implemented over the span of 5 years if that amount is awarded. One particular thing to note is that in the past, there has been a match requirement from the community, and that has been waived with this extra funding. And the purpose of a multi-purpose grant, which is kind of in the name itself, is you have assessment grants that are strictly for going out and doing phase 1, phase 2 assessments on properties that you think might be contaminated. A cleanup grant is specifically for communities that have done some of that assessment work and are pursuing, the remediation of the properties. Multi-purpose falls that all into one. These grants are not offered every year. They're only offered every 2 years. And this is one of those years. So it was yet another reason with the additional funding, with all the momentum that the town of Silverton has right now, the multi-purpose grant, if awarded, will allow you to carry out a lot of those assessment and cleanup activities. But I think it's really important to note that there's a lot of planning effort in there as well. So a lot of community engagement, should you choose to use it. And I think we would recommend that and work with you on that through this application process. And it's also a lot of funding to solicit and actually have these projects done as part of the same grant. So you can go to the next slide, Rachel. I just wanted to give a brief overview of the application and award process. Starting with where we are today, the grant application process has officially opened, and I believe it happened in late September. So 60 days from now, the exact date is November 22nd. Gloria has been kind enough to volunteer herself as the administrator of the grant. So she would go ahead and press the submit button. In the meantime, as part of the application, we identify the applicant, which is the town of Silverton. What we'd love to work with the community on is identifying the partners and the resources that are available in the town of Silverton. Community members, community champions, anything we can use to tell the story of Silverton, and explain why the community is behind this and why the community needs this. That story and narrative piece is a big part of the application, along with the identification of target areas and priority sites. I will say that there is some flexibility in identifying the priority sites. What we do with those is typically pick some sites that really stand out in Silverton as having a real need, real possibility for an end use that would improve, have a lot of community benefit, and is possible to be done. We also use those to work with whoever the consultant is in the end who actually implements this. You want to come up with a work plan and budget. So you use those priority sites mostly to tell the story and help develop a clear work plan for what you guys are going to do down the road. That application will go in November 22nd of this year. And then it's moving at the speed of government. So no one will know. You will be notified if you do not get the award, but you will not be officially told that you do have the grant until June of 2023. At that point is probably the heaviest lift of the entire process. From June 2023 to November of 2023, so the following year, is the planning, preparation, and solicitation. So this is when you're doing your terms and conditions. You are hiring contractors to actually do the work. If there's any property transfers that need to happen or access agreements that need to be had, if you don't own the property or outright, or if there's any other intricacies with it, this is all going to happen between June and November. At the end of that period, I'm actually not sure how it's transferred, probably not a check, maybe you actually get the money somehow, some way. And then it's time to implement and execute over the next 5 years. So through November of 2028, if that is what your timeline looks like. So it is a intricate process, but again, for now, I think you guys are extremely well set up to apply for this, put your name in the hat, and really tell the story of why Silverton needs this. And certainly working with Anthony, we've identified some great priority sites so far, which I think are on the next slide here. So just wanted to talk about these briefly. Again, working with Anthony, Gloria, Lucy on all of these, as well as Mark and Doug at CDPHE, about looking at the priority sites. Again, these are don't necessarily have to be the only ones, or certain properties that end up benefiting from the grant if you are awarded it. But these are sites that, from what I've been able to tell a really good story about what Silverton needs. So the first is the Zanoni parcel, which I believe I spelled correctly on there, but it's been identified for affordable housing. And it was really great to hear the first presenter already starting to tell that story about, limited access to healthcare, makes people depend even more on stable housing, and makes this all the more appealing as a candidate. There is a county-owned parcel along Cement Creek. I want to say it's on the northwest corner of town. That tells a great story of remediating mine-scarred land near a water source. It's also potentially a good open space that could connect pedestrian trails. And lastly, the largest one is the Lackawanna Mill site, which is going to feed into the Animas River Corridor, been identified in the master plan, provide recreation and potential other uses, as well as feed into that Kindle RNPP plan, which I know you guys are working on now. So currently, those are the sites we are working with, and we're going to dive into those a lot deeper over the coming weeks. Go to the next slide, Rachel. Next steps, I think a big part of the reason we're here today is Gloria encouraged us to come and talk to the trustees and answer any questions you guys have. Community buy-in, incredibly important on these processes, and anything you have to offer, ideas, resources to potentially leverage, even if it's just a cool story, we are all ears for that, and it could make its way into the application. We've been working with Gloria and Anthony on capacity for administration and implementation. You do want to have an environmental consultant at the end of the day who actually goes out and executes the plan that was put together, helps with budgeting. We've been working preliminarily with environmental partners on this. They're work in 4 states, but based in Eagle, Colorado, have specific expertise with the Mountain West and these kind of towns in Colorado. Reiterating again, we're trying to leverage community resources and find as many champions as we can. Rachel put us in contact with Jake at MSI and some others who, anybody who has good ideas or could be involved in the application process, we'd love to hear from you there. And then ultimately the next steps are to submit an application. So wanted to keep that short and sweet. I know that was a lot of info to go over quickly, but Rich and I just wanted to open it up for any questions that we could answer with you, and excited to go forward on this.
Thank you. That was very cool.
Yeah, I have a question. So with this grant, is there several of the grants that we apply for, there's an admin fee that we can, is a percentage of the grant, so we can help pay whoever the administrator is for the grant. And I'm wondering if that's going to be included, because if Gloria is going to take this on and it ends up taking a lot of her time, I mean, I could foresee with that much money, big of a project, having to hire somebody to help. And then can we pay for that out of the grant with an administrative line item, or?
Yeah,
Yes.
I know that there's a maximum on it. You can use up to 5% of the grant monies awarded for administrative costs. That can cover, I believe, a range, including the potential for hiring or adding capacity in the town. So absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you.
Just to understand as well, when you're applying for the grant, it says we have to have a list of priority sites, but then it seems like we don't have to actually make a decision of what we're going to prioritize until the grant is awarded. Is that correct?
That is correct. I think it's ideal to have sites that you will execute upon, but we have seen it happen with assessment grants or cleanup grants where things change in the process, and that is a possibility. So there is flexibility there to pivot as you go through, because I saw that timeline. You're looking at a year and a half plus before you're actually doing this. And so you can pivot money within a work plan that you will work on the EPA with to go elsewhere if desired.
I guess finally, is there, since it's a 5-year implementation plan, is there any risk involved? Like if this board is obviously we won't be here. Hopefully our administrator's still here, but if the board changes and there's a big swing in the vision of the board, will the town be liable for the grant? And what do we do in that case?
That's a very good question that I don't have a great answer to. I will say on the capacity front, as far as being able to actually administer the grant, you do, as part of the application, talk about contingency plans. If you guys are a great example. Town of Silverton has one administrator. What happens if that person leaves? And so there will be a contingency plan for that. As far as the board changing in having different opinions on how to use the monies after it has been awarded. That's something I believe you would kind of work on with the EPA as you develop the actual work plan. So again, that's where you have that year, almost a year between the award and actually receiving the money. There's a pretty detailed work plan that gets developed, terms and conditions, all kinds of agreements signed there. So I would say, at that point, you will have subcontractors, you will have lots of resources from us, the EPA, from others to help you work through those. But I believe the idea is to build a plan that can be supported for the 5 years that it's in existence.
Thank you.
Mark?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in on that. So I'm Mark Rudolph with CDPAG. So in the event that you were talking about, let's say, a year, 2 years out, board changes, like, well, this is BS, we don't want to continue on with this. EPA provides a spending authority to the town of Silverton under the form of this grant. And so it's the administrator's job to then pay the chosen contractor, their quarterly or monthly, whatever the invoices are. So at some point in time that if you were to decide you didn't want to complete the final years of it, there would be a remaining amount balance of the spending authority that would go back to EPA.
Okay.
If that answers your
question. And that does, because a lot of, in our world, grants need to be completed in order to qualify for any of the monies. And so you can be paid as you're going, but then if you fail to complete the contract, you have to pay back whatever you've taken.
Right.
But that doesn't sound like
this comes in the form of spending authority.
Right. Thank you.
Does pursuit or acceptance of this grant, if it were to be awarded, preclude us from pursuing any additional related, beyond staff capacity and town capacity? Does it preclude us from any other funding options that we might otherwise consider?
I'll get Mark to back me up on this one as well, but I know.
Look, do you want to add anything else, Brooke?
I was just going to say from I believe it's that you need to draw down 70% of your existing EPA grant before you can apply for another EPA grant.
But I think that would be an EPA Brownfields grant, not a different program. So let's say there was a 319 Clean Water grant from EPA. That would have no effect on an existing Brownfields grant. The same thing goes if it was a Superfund cooperative agreement, for example. Yeah, they all come from the same checkbook, but they come through different programs.
Right. So if we get 800,000 with Brownfields, it doesn't preclude us from the Superfund agreement. It doesn't preclude us from pursuing other.
It doesn't preclude the county from doing it. If there was something in town that we really wanted to do, but the county could still come in if the community decided as a whole they wanted to come in as a different grant applicant.
Okay. Yeah.
On Brownfields.
They don't say you're done, you've gotten enough, we won't give you any more.
And there's still availability for state cleanup dollars as well, and state assessments. Same thing that EPA provides. Those could all be running in tandem. Yeah.
Okay. Seems like quite an unprecedented opportunity. This is unprecedented spending.
Yes.
In our lifetimes.
Yes, so I do want to point out too that we have a proposal in there that would help us complete this grant. It's for $5,000 and it's something we kind of already budgeted for the Zanoni property. So this would just be kind of part of that. I don't technically need you all to vote on that because it's within our purchasing policy and already kind of budgeted for. So just wanted to point that out as well. And what they come up with as far as their assistance would also help us with future grants as well. So if we didn't get this grant, we would still have that information for future grants.
Can I add one more thing on what Gloria just said? Is that if a community does not receive it in the first attempt, in future attempts, they get put on a higher priority list. that happened over in Hinsdale County.
I was curious how we identified partners as the grant preparer.
Sure, go ahead, Anthony.
Sure. We asked around and I worked with CDPHE. We talked to some different entities who would be interested. Some were there's a way that you can sometimes get certain services sometimes for free, but then there's an expectation, and we didn't want to go that route, that they may have a priority. We didn't want to try to figure out the matrix for that. And we worked with Ramble, who is doing cleanup work in the Silver Lake and the basin up there, and with the actually, is that what that is?
The Ramble
as environmental consultant there, and they identified who they've worked with inside these types of areas, and that's who they recommended. And after looking through all that, that's how.
And then we gave them a budget.
Yeah,
they met it.
Yeah. Right.
And do we think that, without that budget, they probably would have bid higher than $5,000 for the support for this grant application?
Yeah, we think it probably would have been somewhere between 9 and 12. And this does two things. One, they do it. They probably will come back. I anticipate maybe they might come back and bid later, but there's others that we've looked into bidding. So we have a good bidding range in it.
Great.
I think Sally has.
Sally?
Well, I don't know if it's time to ask this question yet, or if it's better to hold it until we actually received funding, but I'm just wondering if you could give us kind of a picture of where Silverton is in terms of, you said this is the multi-purpose grant, and I'm wondering, you kind of spoke to it earlier, but like how far along are we in the, assessment category, the cleanup category? Like how much of the, if we were to be awarded an $800,000 grant, which is just, a lot of money for a little community like ours, is it, going mostly to assessment? Is it going, where's the bulk of that? How much of that funding sort of proportionally is available for actual projects and improvements? Where are we on that trajectory?
Looks like Mark.
I'll go ahead and field that from Sally. So ballpark assessment, so there's been a number of sites already tested here that fall within this application. So one of them, Lackawanna Mill, I did a phase 2 assessment. It would have been probably 18 years ago when I first started the health department. That would need to be updated probably with plans for the redevelopment purpose. So inside sampling and then developing a plan for cleanup. That assessment might only cost $10,000 along with data interpretation and analyses. The Zanoni property, I think, did I pronounce that right? It might be less than $10,000 for an assessment on that. So let's look at, 5-6 assessments in the town area, which I think is more than what's already being proposed. It's probably going to be $120,000 of assessments. Add a consultant's fee onto that, so we'll call it 150, 170. We're leaving the remainder all for cleanup work. Cleanup work varies on everything, but fortunately, most of the sites here, as far as I'm aware of, are all metals contamination. They're a lot easier dealt with than, say, a dry cleaner or a gas station. I'm not sure if that answered or helped, Sally.
Yeah. And just then that helped a lot. And so the remaining, $600,000 for cleanup, in terms of cleanup value, does that get us all the way to the finish line, or does that get like one of the sites to the finish line but not the others? Or
I think so. There's the 3 priority projects that we're looking at, but there's also 2 or 3 other projects. One that might be a public-private partnership. I think what we want to do is try to get projects that are clean and good. And if we can add on those others, get those clean and good and ready to go to the next step of development. But the three that we just mentioned right now are a priority. One is that even though the smelter site next to Cement Creek, it talks about water supply. We're not going to use that water for our supply, but it's the supply of water that goes downstream, and it's not in the super fund because it's so close to town. So we're kind of working on that one because we told the state and the EPA that we would work on those areas that are close to town, similar to the North Star here. But we would keep cleaning up sites until we ran out of money, I would think, is what would be the goal, and to get those sites ready to go to the next phase of development. So I don't think that the three sites that we've picked are going to cost that much, but I'm going to knock on this wood and hope that it's plastic. And go from there. I do think the three sites, the Zanoni, because we've already committed to that, and having that site, having that cleaned up and ready to go for our affordable housing is probably the first priority. The second is the next to the river, and then the Lackawanna. But I'm not sure that we're going to need all the money for that. That makes sense, Sally. So if we get all that done with 400,000, then there's other projects that we've been talking about, and we can discuss more maybe at a different meeting, because we're still well, there's some private entities that are involved in that, and they haven't put a letter of commitment to do a public-private partnership, and we need to talk about how that would go.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I was just going to add related to that. I think I'm still a little wanting to learn more on how far this kind of funding can take us. You know, there's that really beautiful picture at the beginning of this presentation that was like very unattractive, nice and beautiful space for a community. And so does this kind of funding get us that far? Like if we're talking about work at Cement Creek, does that get us a bridge or some landscaping or something for public use, or does it get us through cleanup and then the next phase is beautiful?
I think
cleanup is important.
Yeah, and I think that when we're talking about Cement Creek, and we're talking about an area that was mentioned there, the priority project being just as you're going outside of town, there's a bench there. But if we were to do more in Cement Creek or down by the Riverwalk, we could potentially take the work that we're going to do there and match it with, maybe make it a bigger project. So this could go, and depending on whether the funds are classified as federal or state, and maybe match that. And we're going to have to get creative to do that, but that opportunity exists. I don't know why it wouldn't be as far as what we're putting together. So as long as they're, well, I don't want to get into that about it, but yeah, I think if we're not going to let the money, 400,000 go by the wayside.
We know how to leverage it.
Yes.
I'll just add that the multi-purpose grant does allow some of that funding to be used for planning activities. That picture, which I totally forgot to tell you about, was a multi-purpose grant that was awarded to Canyon City, I think 2 years ago. So that rendering you saw was part of their planning activity, which they did apply their funds, but it didn't go to actually building any of that. It was about community engagement strategy and what would be the best end use there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. It keeps carrying us closer to the finish line.
And it's pretty.
Yeah.
Would this board like to give direction to pursue this Brownfields grant? I support it. Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you all.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Well, one last thing I'd like to add in, Brooks had mentioned about Canyon City having a successful application for a multi-purpose grant. I think that the EPA looks kindly on communities that are able to apply brownfields where there's Superfund associated with it, because Superfund has a harder time in the redevelopment aspects and components, which is one of EPA's mission goals. So, but I throw that in as well.
Nice. And thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Brooks.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Rachel Brooks. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
All right. The next item on our agenda is new business 4B, request to determine payment of utilities in red avalanche zones during winter months.
Matt, can you please promote John Sites?
Hello.
Hi, John.
This agenda item is in regards to a request from one of our utility customers, Douglas Hart, who was approved for use in a red avalanche zone, but seasonally between May and October. And Mr. Hart has requested that the board consider waiving his utility rates between November and April. And staff does not have a recommendation on this request, but recommends that the trustees consider and respond to Mr. Hart as they will. If there are any questions that I can answer or contribute to the discussion, I'd be glad to.
To quantify this, is the period of time that the waiver would apply to equate to about $1,000 of utility fees for this?
That's a good question. I don't have my calculator in front of me.
It's okay. I have Matt in front of us. Go ahead, Matt.
It's about $650.
$650. Okay.
That's what the minimum base rate is.
Okay, and then my other question was, how many landowners in red zones do we have in Silverton?
Landowners or landowners have approved use?
I'd say landowners with a tap.
Yeah. To my knowledge, Mr. Hart is the only one.
Yep.
Okay.
At this time.
And it looks like Mr. Hart would like to say something. Are we okay promoting Mr. Hart to speak on his own behalf? Cool. This isn't, I don't think, technically a public hearing or anything like that. So this is an accommodation that we're making. Mr. Hart, you are now on our panelist list, and if you unmute yourself, you can go ahead and address the board.
Okay, there I am. Thank you very much. First of all, compared to what you've just been discussing, this is so trivial, and I appreciate you taking just a couple of minutes to consider my request. And my request is very simple. I think Mr. Seitz explained it perfectly adequately, and that is that the town code does not allow me to use my property for 6 months out of the year. And so I'm just asking if you might agree that it's reasonable that I not have to pay for a service that I am really not able to use because of the town code.
Understood. Thank you.
Can we expect more taps going into the red zone in the future, John?
It's certainly possible. This use was approved by the board for Mr. Hart conditionally. And in the number 5 condition, which is this approval is included in your packet, states that this site shall not be occupied with RVs, persons, etc., as specified in the municipal code between November 1st and May 1st. So Mr. Hart is accurate in saying that he's not allowed to use his property in those months. And there isn't a ton of red avalanche terrain in town that you could actually put taps in and be used, but there is some. So it's worth noting that if the board is interested in entertaining this type of use in the future, that a decision like this would probably be somewhat precedental.
I think I can definitely appreciate the request, Mr. Hart. Your point is, I can't use my property. Why am I paying for utilities there? I think what I kept coming back to when thinking about this is the town's overall philosophy and approach to utility rates has not been a usage-based rate. We don't charge residents. We have a flat fee. And so if folks are not here in this winter, they're not here in the summer, it is a flat fee. And that really kind of supports the utility services we have to provide for all residents and all capacity that we need in town. And so if we had a usage-based rate, that would probably accommodate you more, but that hasn't been the town's overall approach so far.
That said, I mean, a usage-based rate, he wouldn't pay while he wasn't there either.
Yeah.
I think the thing that distinguishes that on Mr. Hart's or to Mr. Hart's benefit is that, you know, it doesn't really set a precedent for like summer or winter only residents requesting similar waiver because they do have access to their property. And in this case, he isn't permitted access or the same use in the winter. What I get kind of hung up on, which is more administrative than substantive, is that this probably should have been an ask requested at the time that the zoning was permitted as one of the like conditions and exceptions, and that coming in after the fact. You know, I just don't know whether or not like the planning commission, for example, would have, you know, weighed that as material in their decision if there would have been other like considerations given in the condition list.
Mm-hmm. And if it sets the precedent, again, for one-off, I'm concerned about the one-off requests that we could entertain as opposed to thinking about it in a whole structure that we might be doing with our utility rate study and elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, it's the amount of landowners in red zones that would be able to use their properties. I mean, just looking at the amount of, you know, conditions on his, I mean, he's got 20 conditions. So I don't feel like it's going to be something that, I mean, I was at first worried about precedent setting as well, but you know, what folks have to go through to use some of these properties and the amount of conditions that we set on them, it makes it a pretty limited amount of land users that could then ask for this. And the fact that there's also, you know, the hard date, makes it a little bit easier for me. It's, you know, November through May. And if you don't have access to your property, it makes sense to me that you don't pay for them. I don't know. This one was a tough one for me.
So we have about
looking
at the Avalanche Hazard District map, we have about 10 full blocks within these red zones. And that's a real rough estimate, just looking at how it's overlaying. But a large portion of a vast majority of that probably isn't going to be developed anytime soon. It looks like, you know, one section is all around the visitor center, which is not privately owned land. And then another section is the upper portion of developable Shrine Hill above Shrine Road, which also is like way in the future of potential development, if at all. So it probably is a relatively minimal precedent to be set financially.
I think certainly for Avalanche areas, but just the precedent of waiving certain fees on kind of one-off basis as opposed to having policy. I get hung up on procedurally.
Yeah, I think the counterpoint is that we also could be incentivizing people to develop parcels for use in the summer that they otherwise Mr. Hart wouldn't have otherwise developed this. And he wouldn't be paying utilities at all in the summer. He'd just be paying property taxes for undeveloped land they put an RV on with no tap. And in this case, we're generating additional utility revenue because of his use in the summer or for 6 months of the year.
And proposed benefit to the.
And that perhaps other people with red zone property would be like, oh, like if I don't have to pay, I mean, I don't know if that's like material either, but like if I don't have to pay utilities for the portion that I'm not allowed to use it, maybe I would put some more permanent infrastructure there and use it better. And then that goes to a bigger question of like, are we seeking to incentivize development of summer red zone property usage? Or do we like empty land, even if it's privately held?
The important distinction for me, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think was what Shane just mentioned is that, is the code not allowing him? So the difference being, you know, I'm not just choosing to be in Silverton at one time of the year or another time of the year and would like to, you know, pay by usage. It's really that the code has not allowed it. I do think it sounds like, you know, procedurally going forward, if we could set the precedent of that something that should be, you know, discussed and determined in the process of approving that usage, that makes a lot of sense. In this particular case, I think to me, and again, like I may be hearing this differently than what you're discussing, maybe Dana, but to me, to be procedural in this case would be to say our code isn't allowing him to make use of that service. So procedurally, I came to the opposite conclusion, but that if we wanted that to be different, we would maybe need to look at the approval for the whole entire project differently earlier in the process. But at this point, I think if he's not by code allowed to make use of that service, I do see that as a really as a fair request. Whether that's the procedure we want it to be is maybe a different question, but
Mr. Hart, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, what I wanted to say is I worked tirelessly with the planning director to try and come up with all of the, you know, unintended consequences that we could possibly think of, and never having had a water bill in the town of Silverton before. This is one that simply never occurred to me, nor did it occur to the planning director, or we would have included it in the list of 20 and then 21 restrictions at the time. So, you know, hopefully you would not penalize me for not thinking of it 2 years ago when we went through this process.
Thank you.
I'm not having, I get where you guys are coming from, but I'm not having the same hangups as you guys. I kind of, with Sally, if it seems like a reasonable request to me if we're not allowing him to even have access to those services for that period of time.
Is there anything we're not considering from the legal perspective, Clayton, on either changing the utility rate or how these conditions were in the original approval?
No, I've been sitting here thinking about that. I don't, you know, I think the board can make, you know, a reasonable decision on either side. You know, certainly if there's somebody else that you are excluding or keeping them from access to a utility, you know, I think those things would be few and far between per the discussion. And the issue of, you know, setting a precedent, if you wanted to kind of, you know, cut this one off from everything else, I think a good way to differentiate this is that, you know, the applicant is being kept from even using the utility. So I don't think this would come into play for someone who has voluntarily left a residence or a business and isn't going to be using the utilities, but they could have access to it. So I think the access issue is where you're going to hang your hat if you wanted to grant it. And on the flip side of that, I think that, one other way to look at this versus saying, oh, well, we only let him use his property for 6 months. It's a conditional use. So the glass half full way to look at this is, well, he gets to use that property for 6 months when it's not a use by right. And so it really could go either way. I don't see any large legal implications from it. You just be creating a policy for utility billing where the person does not have access to their utilities for whatever time period. I think that would be the way to do it.
Yeah, could we just put a larger policy in place too and say, if a landowner seeks, use of a red zone property and we don't allow them access to it, our policy is to not charge them, and then it's.
I'd be concerned with doing a blanket policy today with that, like without.
Oh, yeah, I think we need to do more research, but that might just be the best way to go about this, because I don't think, certainly some taxes that are necessary, whether people are using their property or not, but this one doesn't seem to make sense for me.
I'm in support of Mr. Hart's request, and I want it to be super clear that I'm not in support of granting waivers for seasonal use.
No.
Only in this case because the land is only accessible by code or usable by code for a portion of the year.
And I do think, to Tyler's point, for me, somehow the hang up just is like the one-off variances just feels, it feels off. Even though I think I could very much sit here and agree with a code that's with a policy that said, we will bill for the time you're allowed to access your property and not for the time you're not allowed to.
Well, I think the good policy that we could recommend tonight is that the planning commission at least consider this when there's conditional seasonal use applications going forward. And so even if the applicant doesn't ask for this waiver, it's something that they just consider and they say like.
And as Mr. Hart said earlier, he and I imagine it was Lisa at the time, went over all these and tried to think of all the unintended consequences. There's just no way to do it with these.
And I think I appreciate, Clayton, the clarification that we can, again, go back to he's not allowed to use his property versus folks wanting discounts on their seasonal water usage.
John, one quick question. Is there any additional cost associated with the seasonality of this property? Do we turn on and off the tap each year so that it doesn't freeze or anything like that? Or is that all your part's responsibility?
We do just like any other seasonal user.
Okay. But immaterial relative to the whole.
We do tens and tens of turn-ons and turn-offs seasonally in the spring and in the fall and other random times of the year. So we spend quite a bit of time servicing our customers that way on a regular basis. Okay. So I can't think of another reason why this would end up costing more money.
Okay.
Matt, what about like administratively again? I mean, this is just, again, one example, but keeping track of like these kinds of variances.
Administratively, we just have to set up some sort of SOP for these properties that may or may not have variance given, and just have it kind of like set in place to check during these months to make sure they're not getting billed. I think that might be an option I can set up in our accounting software to schedule cancellation or temporary turn-offs of services. I'll just have to look into that further.
Does that strike you as burdensome or?
If I can find a setting in Castell where it will just automatically like turn off the services, once November hits, then that would be negligent and capacity.
And in the event that we had redrawn red zones and the property were to be taken out, would we have the administrative capacity to kind of have that flagged and be like, oh, this needs to turn back on for year round? billing. So if at some point red zones are redrawn and this property is no longer limited to summer access, or other properties, like maybe this one's deep in the red zone, but other ones that are like right on the edge, if it gets redrawn, do we have the capacity to keep track of that and then to turn annual billing or, full year billing back on?
Again, SOP would have to be established, but I don't think it'd be very burdensome at all.
Well, I guess that'd be tied to the property owner. Would also have to ask for a further variance to have access to their property, since right now they don't.
I'm sure that would come before us.
I would almost suggest putting that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would almost suggest putting that responsibility of reminding, like when we get our turn off my water for the year on the owner. So that it's not on staff and we don't have to do any kind of a reimbursement if it doesn't get done. It would be on the owner to kind of fill that out and make sure that that's happening.
That's
Got
a
it.
good suggestion.
Do we have a form for turning on and off taps? It's not just like a phone call to John.
Nope, we have a form that people come and fill out.
So can we, okay.
And if red zone things become more of a thing in the future, we can always add a box to that turn off request saying, check here if it's a red zone tab.
Well, Mr. Hart, thank you for bearing with us. Even though it's a pretty small amount of money annually, it's the first time this board's considered this issue. So we want to just think through everything.
Thank you.
Do we have further discussion, or would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to waive utility rates to be paid in locations where seasonal occupation is required based upon conditional approval of land use in these locations by the Board of Trustees.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Davis.
Yes.
Trustee Krieger.
Yes.
Trustee Bierman.
Yes.
Trustee George.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously with one absent.
Thank you. Is there any?
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hart. Is there any further administrative direction sought related to this motion?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. Thank you, everybody.
I just want to build a big berm. I just want to open that drain up and build a big avalanche berm.
Shit, lots of shit, all kinds of shit.
No, big berms, just like they do in Iceland.
All right, next item on our agenda is 4C, adoption of draft 2023 budget.
Right, well, it is the responsibility of the administrator to prepare the first draft of the budget for the Board of Trustees to consider and submit the initial adoption to the state by October 11th. Per state statute 29-1-105. The budget you are being presented tonight has been discussed at the Finance Committee as well as a work session. I have included the trustee goals that it accomplishes in your agenda memo, and the final budget will outline the master plan actions that this budget supports as well. I just haven't had to get that framework in place yet since it was just adopted. In your trustee goals, you identified the need for a grant writer as well. And that is not reflected in this current budget. But I have posed the idea of sharing a grant writer. And I'm currently working on kind of bringing that to fruition. So I don't know if it will be in this budget or the next budget, but that's still on my radar. And then I guess I would take any comments or critiques on this version of the budget, and then we can talk about next steps for budgeting.
Just a little bit of work has gone into this so far.
For the work session and the Finance Committee meeting, can I make a motion to approve the first draft budget of the 2023?
Can I did have
budget?
two comments. I did have two comments. One, I'm still just wondering about any monies in there for stuff that comes out of the Kendall process. We don't have any line item in there for anything. And just thinking that has been a high community priority, and there could be some low hanging fruit or stuff that comes up that we really are not even like talking about. So that still feels a little bit like a gap. And then I'm still kind of stuck on the fire department budget. I really felt like my intention, at least in what we passed, was not that there would be an additional 30,000 for fireworks every year, but that there would be an increase to the fire department budget, and increases to their expenses would be absorbed, rebudgeted, planned for in the increase in the budget that we were giving them. So I feel uncomfortable approving an increase from 41,000 to 80,000. To me, I just would like to see I think their budget had changed 8,000, and I just on principle kind of would like to see that $8,000 increase absorbed in the $30,000 amount that was proposed for fireworks. That's an opinion.
So to make the increase 22 instead of 30?
Yeah. Yeah. Or to make it 30, but the initial budget request should be $8,000 lower. Like, let me look at the actual number.
So you're saying they asked for 8, we're giving them 38, we should get,
Yeah. Yeah.
giving them 22 plus
Yeah.
the additional.
Yeah. Or again, I was hoping that the $30,000 increase would be at their discretion to budget accordingly. And it doesn't have to be 22 for fireworks and 8 for an increase in their budget. It's just, this is the additional increase budgeted accordingly, but I don't want to see a $30,000 request for fireworks every year and an increase in their budget request of $8,000 to $10,000 every year. That's where I'm hung up on. Am I articulating that?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if it's 22,000 for fireworks and 8,000 for the budget increase.
Oh, yeah,
I just,
understand.
I felt like we heard from a lot of folks on, we don't want to spend this quantity on fireworks. So my hope was, the intent was, here's your money to improve your budget how you see that you need it. But increases in training or expenditures could come out of this total increase that we're giving you. And I just continuing to have a line item for fireworks and for budget increases feels.
Wait, I'm sorry. Because under the fire protection services, it's just.
Oh, there isn't the 30,000. Right, but then the draft budget is 79,000.
instead of 71.
Yeah, I think my concern is there was an $8,000 increase in their general budget, and there was a line item increase of $30,000 for fireworks for the following year. And I just still don't feel quite comfortable with that total.
I think it's tough to do what would make you comfortable in this case, and I agree with your discomfort there. I think the trick that we have here is that this is like a discretionary amount of money that we're supposed to give them, whether it's 22 or 30. And your comment the last budget meeting with them was that we just don't want to have, further requests coming, like use this to plan and benefit and then absorb. And I think the challenge there is that, like, this composition of this board sits until April 24. So in the next budget meeting, we'd probably have the same group of people and if they come and ask for more money, for whatever reason, they say, well, we're still going to spend 30 on fireworks and we have another 8 increase. And this is just being hypothetical. We would be able to say, our history with this conversation is such that, we were expecting you to anticipate the 4th of July happens every year. Fireworks are going to cost at least 30. So, go ahead and do a bunch of fundraising for that and absorb the budget increase and just use this to plan for the next few years.
Yeah.
The year after that, totally different group of people potentially. And those of us who are still here can make that case that that's what it was for. But it kind of needs to be viewed in a singular year view and more the idea is like we're granting a significant increase to the budget because there was this need that they expressed that a meaningful portion of the community supported, whether or not that's a majority, who knows. And the town didn't want to have discretion with respect to this kind of like impossible question to know what the real answer is or what the right answer is. So I think in a way we're saying like we are very much funding fireworks as long as the fire department supports fireworks. If they were to decide they don't, then we'd still be funding them this amount of money. But I think it's been made clear to us that they support fireworks. And so I think we're still back to the same thing. It's like, even though we've asked them and set of expectations, like that's not necessarily terribly relevant next year or the year after. And I think we still have to like view it through this snapshot of what we're granting right now and what it's going to be spent on next year.
Well, then if that's kind of the decision-making process, I would just prefer to see $22,000 line item for fireworks and an increase in the budget for 8,000. Because it still, again, just feels like we heard from a lot of community members as well that the line item there was more than they thought.
And I guess I'm just hung up on like in our budget, there's no line item for fireworks.
No.
Like in the budget they presented us, they had one, but we're not in our budget. That's where it matters. There's not a line item for fireworks. We're going to give them that money. It's that our budget. There's no line item. Do what you will. There's money and that's it. So I don't feel like, I mean,
we're not deciding for them, but we're enabling.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And I would like to enable $8,000 less. But maybe that's just
I think another way to look at that is that like we did write the check for this coming year's fireworks by giving them the funds, knowing what they were allocated for by the fire department this year. That money's been spent. I assume on October 1st, you know, the fireworks were ordered and money was paid. This is looking at what's going to be paid for fireworks in 2024 if they continue to have the same priorities. And I don't think it's that unreasonable to do what you're proposing, saying increase of 22 and letting them know that based on what their current budget is, if it's the same in 2024, they have however many months that is, you know, 21 months to budget for the town providing $22,000 and coming up with whatever the rest is.
or determining a different show or whatever.
Totally.
They're, again, their discretion, but.
So I don't think that that's like an unreasonable path forward. Certainly.
Sorry, I just opened that can again, guys. All right, I didn't let your motion proceed.
Sure.
I just.
Important. But this is also the first draft.
Yeah. Well, if we can.
Time to work out all the.
If we can change it.
Time to work out all the.
Potentially get changed in the spreadsheet if we are going to change it. That would be my question. Yeah.
Okay, so the two comments were putting some potential line item in for Kendall progress.
Yeah.
Because we do have, you know, PDF to charrette with the community sometime in the next little bit. And we'd like to be able to take some action on that, but we do have the $100-something thousand budgeted for deck fixes.
Yeah.
You, as well as increased budgets for maintenance over there and equipment that we need, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really hard to anticipate what we would budget for without going through the community process and kind of getting that information first. So while it might be a little bit of a lag, we are doing deferred maintenance in the interim.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think there's a little bit of time that's lost and we have a lot of community momentum. I mean, I don't think something like an ice skating rink is incredibly controversial. And there was a lot of like positive feedback for something like that. If we just keep kicking those kinds of things down the road, I just feel like.
So it is going to be interesting to see where to put the ice rink, you know, like just that basic thing can be very challenging.
How much did we budget for planning for Kendall this year?
40 or 56,000.
And do we have anything budgeted for planning for Kendall next year?
If we don't use all of our GoCo grant, then it would be about 40, I think we'd have about 48,000.
Okay. Because I think that's probably the more relevant line item that because we're probably not going to build something next year based on the timeline we have, anything like super material besides the deck. But next year could be the year for determining scope and being ready to build the following year.
Mm-hmm. And hoping that we can get grant funding for a lot of that as well.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Would it make sense to just increase that planning line item by the $8,000 delta to match?
And I think I misspoke. It would be a $12,000 delta because we did a match on our DOLA grant. So yeah, it would be 12,000.
Because if we had 40 something available, and just bringing that back up to the same amount that we had this year, so that we have capacity for planning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we find a good portion of that.
Yeah.
Through Dana's second suggestion.
It's funny how we just found $8,000. Sally, you were going to say something.
Oh, I wasn't sure about bringing this up in the draft budget, I guess, but since we're on this subject, I just wanted to confirm that the $120,000 that we have budgeted for the Kendall deck, because it sounds like we do have construction plans for that, covers the construction plans for the deck. I think what I would hate to see happen is that we, budget something that's kind of just outside the scope of what the deck needs. Mm-hmm. And, that we fall short in our budget by an amount that's prohibitive in repairing the deck, but that the deck construction plans aren't necessarily that far, beyond what we budgeted, or just some tension between like the budget and the actual construction plans that prevents that deck from being repaired. Because I do think that the Kendall facility itself generates, we can see that in the budget. It generates income when it's rented and it's available in the summer for weddings, especially. And if we don't market that facility and we don't rent it, we can see that amount significantly decreases. So I do think that it's a big investment, but it has shown to have a return for the town, not to mention the value that it has just, for the amenity of Kendall, kind of as a year-round facility for the community to use. So yeah, I kind of just wanted to speak to that number because I think it's one of our bigger numbers, not related to staffing or just essential services.
And I would suggest in our Parks and Rec committee that we have on the 20th, that we can evaluate that a little bit more. We'll be looking at the deck plans and they are construction ready, but I just kind of want to open that discussion up at that meeting and we can change line items based off of that.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of like first draft budget, it seems like we're in the ballpark.
Any other comments or questions on the budget or objections to Dana's suggestions?
So I guess just like the ice rink is something that we're passionate about. And it's I think it's an easy thing to kind of talk about because it's like, so where in the budget do we have funds for maybe like a small improvement?
Well, we're doing it right now.
Tiles and things like
We're
that.
taking off all of the tiles right now, because we feel like that might have made the shift a little bit.
It's the groundwater. Comes out from
Or maybe just having part of it tiled and part of it not. So actually Todd's been prioritizing the guys to take out all those tiles, resurface it, and then try and make it a better experience this year. And that's mostly just staff time right now.
I hear what we're saying, where when we talk about Kendall, because it is just a place that we know and love and wanting, believe me, of all the people, I definitely would love to put money towards improvements there and making that facility really work for the community. I wonder if this is something like kind of returning to our work session earlier in the evening where we really would benefit from the DHM plan, just to kind of put this in order, like to have the DHM plan complete and then move towards budgeting for what we prioritize in that plan. It just seems like to try and sort of guess at what that's going to look like in this meeting seems a little bit out of order. And once we have the plan and we know what the priorities are and where that's headed, it will make much more sense to budget for it. And it won't feel like a sort of a shot in the dark at like, well, let's throw 30,000 over there. Let's throw 15. And I guess I would just advocate for making sure that the current project that's in the pipeline that has some planning and momentum behind it and is, something that we know is part of maintenance, the deck works. And when it comes to funding the additional work that we want to see done at Kendall, we get the plan in place and make sure the plan is funded and can be seen through to completion, and then use that to budget in the next cycle, which I don't know. That's just my opinion on that particular point.
I totally agree. And I think that sounds like the consensus with everybody. Minus that we hadn't talked about the ability to afford the deck or not. That was an additional insight. Saw a lot of head nods.
Yeah.
So
Where are we? What's the?
it sounded like the direction that was suggested was to increase the planning budget by $16,000 related to Kendall. Is that right? Or whatever the actual number is to match whatever the planning budget was for this year.
Mm-hmm.
To increase the fire department budget by 21 instead of 22 instead of 30.
Mm-hmm.
And did we have any other modifications?
Well, and then just because I think that the Shane, your suggestion in the last meeting of how to note potential grant funding, that's in Gloria's memo, grant revenues, just notes of potential awards in those amounts. Is that something that we should put the Brownfields grant?
Oh, the
in there as
$800,000.
well? It's just so significant. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to it would really blow things out if it was in the budget itself, but as a note.
We apply for that this year and then we wouldn't be awarded it for
Right, we wouldn't
years.
see the funds for several years,
Right.
so it would actually be a disservice to put that in at this point, but.
I see
If there's
that.
no match.
And there's no match.
And
so we
there's no
don't
match.
have to
Yeah,
budget.
yeah. Okay. Yep. Okay. Thanks.
But I appreciate the thorough thought because there are things that I will miss. So I want to make sure that I get all 7 of your heads together.
I appreciated the variance column addition.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say that was such a good suggestion. I didn't even know what I was missing out on, but that's a really helpful way of scanning the budget.
So how does the process work? Can we still approve the draft? Yep. And then make the changes and we come and we approve another draft?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Your motion.
So also just to be thorough, the questions that were noted in the memo that we didn't talk about yet. Can we budget to commission an architect to prepare pre-approved home designs? We don't have a quote for this yet, so that's still not reflected in the draft. What are we doing for our senior community? Todd's working to come up with an MOU with Carrie for the senior center. But possibly we also can allocate some portion of our affordable housing development to senior housing or healthcare worker housing, which also supports aging in place resources. And that doesn't change our budget, but addresses that question somewhat. And then do we want to increase our affordable housing line item? But I think everyone was okay with the idea of having the large match for the Blair Street grant application footnoted, where that funding would become, we still have every opportunity to consider to accept the grant or not if awarded, and then to allocate it to affordable housing or land banking or something else if we were to choose not to pursue the Blair Street grant, or if we didn't get the Blair Street grant. So it doesn't seem like we need to adjust anything there. Is that
I had another thought on that too.
Great.
Potentially. I don't know if Anthony's probably not still in the room, but as the housing coordinator, potentially just trying to find out from him if he had anything on the horizon that he would recommend that we, be prepared to fund or match, or I don't know if, and Gloria, you've probably already had a conversation with him, but to be more strategic about how to budget for housing. I think Shane, you've given some great examples of like how we have housing kind of tucked in other places, tucked away in the budget, but I don't know if there was something more specific or that Anthony may have some information for us, or Gloria maybe via.
Yeah, I think there's a little confusion over Anthony's role of like what he's doing, because he's not actually our housing authority, which I would like a housing authority in that capacity. He is part-time and paid for by the Zanoni grant. So in his list of tasks that he has to get accomplished includes the annexation, includes the build out of the rest of Anvil, and also includes the build out of or at least the plan for the Zanoni property, and his position sunsets in 2024. So it's a part-time position with kind of his tasks already laid out. And so he's being contacted right now by a ton of people wanting more housing resources, and he doesn't have the time or capacity to be able to address those. So I still really want to push for a housing authority.
Yeah.
And if this housing line item that we have budgeted for 20,000 might help support that next year. But I'm still going to keep pushing for that capacity building for the housing authority.
And is Beth able to temporarily field some of those requests that are coming to Anthony?
So not at this time. Everyone is pushing everything onto him. And not really realizing that he has a set task that's paid for by a grant and a limited amount of time. So we are going to have another kind of organizational meeting here, hopefully in the next week or two, that kind of helps define that a little bit more, because it would be great if he could be our one-stop shop for housing, but in all reality, that would be a full-time position and probably something for a housing authority. So.
Got it.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification, Gloria. And I retract Anthony's name specifically, maybe. More, my point is, I guess kind of to be in line with sort of the Kendall comments, is like, it doesn't necessarily make sense to just throw a certain amount at a line in the budget for housing generally, but I did express support for having our need for housing reflected in our budget, and to get a better sense of like what that amount may be, even if it's something that we end up looking at using, if we don't receive the Blair Street grant or something like that, to get a better sense of like what's out there. I just was wondering if there's a way of tapping into some of our resources who work with us on housing and getting a sense from one of those resources, whether it's Anthony or Beth or I don't know, somebody that I'm missing, who may be able to just give us an idea of what that number might be.
I put it in my notes.
Thank you.
Okay. Are we all, I think we've now covered all the memo topics and everything as well. So would the motion be to approve this draft budget with the revisions requested?
Yep.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Davis.
Yes.
Trustee Grant.
Yes.
Trustee Bierman.
Yeah.
Trustee George.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barlow.
Yes.
Mayor Ferguson.
Yes.
Motion passes with yeses from all present.
Thank you very much. It is getting a little late, so hopefully we got through, I think, most of the heavy lifting already, but there is still some pretty material stuff. So just flagging that for everybody. So the next item on our agenda is approval of consent agenda items.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Davis.
Yes.
Trustee Cranker.
Yes.
Trustee Bierman.
Yes.
Trustee George.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barlow.
Yes.
Mayor Ferguson.
Yes.
Motion passes with all yeses from all present.
Thank you. Staff reports.
All right. So I'll keep this brief, but as some of our town staff, including myself, Matt and Nathan, will be attending a FEMA National Response Framework certification tomorrow through Thursday. So we will be busy 8 to 5 for 3 days. So I'll have an out of the office thing and I will be getting back to people at lunchtime and then after 5. 3 of the boards that I sit on met in the last couple of weeks. Region 9 combined with Southwest COG are actively writing a grant for broadband redundancy in the area, and I've included an update in the staff reports in your packet. And they'll be working with the county to acquire the match through DOLA for the San Juan portion of the project, which leaves the town open to still apply for a match for our wastewater treatment. San Juan Development Association met last week and we'll be putting out a survey for the businesses similar to the one that Durango put out. It would include questions like staff levels, staff retention techniques, housing, and inflation repercussions. And Willie is putting that together, and then my portion is sending it out to the business members. So hopefully that will be going out soon. There's also a memo included on our efforts to date with the land acknowledgement, since it is Indigenous Peoples Day. And this was requested by Trustee Bierma. We have not had very much luck contacting our contact at the Southern Ute Tribe. We've reached out several times. And then our attorney has a couple of concerns with our current adopted land acknowledgement. So that may be something that we would want to workshop in the future. I'm happy to harness any questions on the staff reports.
Are you attending ICS 300?
Yeah.
There.
Okay. I was trying to put it in layman terms.
Thanks for all you're doing.
Crushing it. Any other comments, questions on staff reports? Hi, Todd.
Good evening.
All right, moving on to committee reports. Are you able to do the recap on the personal ordinance committee meeting?
Right. So yeah, I can do that. We had our personal and ordinance committee on the 5th. And we discussed the certified local government ordinance and the formation of the historic review committee. And this would be separate, taking this back from the planning commission, which they've requested, that we kind of take it back in-house and we walk through the entire ordinance and the formation of what it would look like to formate to form that committee. And we got a lot of great feedback. I felt like it was just, it was a very productive meeting. So we'll be making those changes, meeting with the Historic Society, and then kind of coming back to you all for a final look at it. And then eventually it'll be one of your packets. Our goal is to try and get it done by January.
Awesome.
That's all. Right? We didn't talk about anything else, did we?
No. But it's pretty detailed review. And if anybody wants to watch our staff just absolutely crushing it, Lucy walked us through the draft with annotations and was like very, very expert and professional. It was awesome. All right. Trustee reports. I have one. You have one too?
I do.
Cool. I was just going to say the town hosted the county commissioner candidate night, and which is available to watch on YouTube. And the 4 candidates that were there, answered a bunch of questions, a lot of which are very relevant to the town. As everyone knows, we're the only town in the county. So the county pays a lot of attention to us. And so the composition of county commissioners is very relevant to our day-to-day lives in Silverton. So please go talk to them, watch the video, and get out and vote.
I had one, just circling back to conversations earlier about citations and fines and parking and code. I had a citizen who lives on Blair Street approach me and just kind of have comments that they're very confused about what parking is allowed in front of their residence, what parking isn't allowed. And they had a tour bus parked in front, but they were told they couldn't have their relative that had a truck with a trailer parked out long, like horizontally. So I think just this resident was expressing something I think I've heard from a couple other people, just sort of confusion on parking code, streets, and kind of how they're trying to follow the rules, but they aren't always quite clear what the rules are. And if the rules are also being applied to some of our visitors, or, again, we have more tourist bus coming in, stuff like that. So not something to solve here, but just a larger citizen comment on how we manage parking in streets for residences and business visitors.
Great. Any other trustee reports? Okay. Moving on to continued business, 9A, the 9318 contract relating to Columbine Park.
All right. And so Todd wrote a memo for you all, and this is something that's gone back and forth from our lawyers to his lawyer and drafted, and then we were waiting for the final construction documents. So that is why it is finally being presented to you all.
It's unique to get to look at a contract this far into a project. And I guess my only question would be, does the contract sufficiently cover like anything that seemed potentially like gray area from the original bid? And like, is there anything we should tighten up at this point with respect to expectations or timeline or pay schedule or other things like that? That, may not have been totally clear from the original bid documents.
Not to my knowledge, the intention and deliverables of the contract remain the same, as does the timeline. And we are moving a little slower than we are hoping, but we still are projected to remain on time. So I don't see any change. And this has been reviewed by myself, Gloria, and Clayton.
Awesome. Thank you.
I had one question on number 2. We're talking about time and commencement, and there was a date in there saying services shall be completed no later than December 31st, 2022. So I was curious what services those referred to for that timeline.
Might have found our.
Yeah, I think that was a typo.
Okay.
You might have found our one typo.
Okay, just making sure. I didn't know if it was services related to the contract execution or the actual scope. Yeah.
All right, we can fix that typo.
So it should be changed to 2023. Okay. And then I was there were parts where I think we were referred to as the town and areas where we were referred to as the principal. And I didn't know, I'm not an attorney, so I don't know if that's a problem, but it was like, that would be, are we the principal or are we the town, or does it need to be consistent, or is it irrelevant if we're both?
Clayton, would you mind taking that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the answer is we need to make it consistent. I think the beginning of the contract, well, I know the beginning of the contract lists the town and labels it then as the principal. And so we just need to go through the contract for that. The last go around for this was some more substantive changes. So I'm happy to just go through it one more time for some of these edits and make sure that it looks consistent and we don't have any dates wrong.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, those last 2 comments were nitpicky, but I just thought it would be helpful.
No,
to be
nitpicky matters. They're great comments. Thank you. And that's my fault on the town principal thing, because that can be, you know, it can be a cause for confusion. We want to make it as clear as possible. So I'll go through it and make sure that it reads correctly.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on the draft contract? So we would make a motion to approve the contract with the suggested revisions.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Davis.
Yes.
Trustee Baker.
Yes.
Trustee Bierman.
Yes.
Trustee George.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes.
Motion passes with the 8 from all present.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the next related item of continued business, 9B, Columbine Park update. Todd, you've been promoted to panelist.
Sure. So Columbine Park, things are going great to date. We've expended 15.3% of the total project budget. That includes demolition, site preparation, footer and stem wall construction, rough plumbing and electrical, among other things. There is a rather detailed expense tracker. Matt really has been doing a great job of tracking expense line by line each item. And it kind of gives you a sense of where we're at. We have some pretty exciting progress coming up. The backfill and slab pour preparations I walked by today. The backfill is nearly complete, which is exciting. And then Dave Zanoni is going to be over there this week doing a lot of the radiant heat, running that plumbing. The following week, we expect to have the final pours done, and then we'll really start seeing more tangible, visible progress as we get into framing, and it's looking like the week of 10/17 or 10/24. And typically, once you see framing start going up, even if it's just more visible, it's feeling like you're really taking off. So again, we don't think there's going to be any major impacts to our date of 4th of July or early July of next year. And we think we'll kind of be taking off here soon. And we are, we were waiting for plans from Mountain Grain kind of buttoned up, and that has slowed down Brian and some of his subcontractors a little bit because there's things we've kind of had to answer on the fly. There's also things like a water service line that we just had to address as it came up. So I know there has been a bit of a community sentiment kind of wondering why we're not moving faster. The reality is we're moving as fast as we can. And the way we at least view it internally is that we're right on schedule.
Great. Any questions or comments for Todd? Or related to the project generally?
Cool tracker map.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we'll move on to continued business 9C. Resolution 2022-21, a resolution adopting a refund and reimbursement policy.
John's on deck.
Relating to leak forgiveness.
Yep, I'll take this one. So this is just a revision of our 2019 resolution, which enables people that have accidental water usage to not be paying what could be thousands of dollars in a water bill that is not supremely detrimental to the town if that happens, as far as our water supply goes, or our cost of making water. So staff that time felt it was fair to forgive a verified leak. If Public Works has a chance to check it out and it was accidental usage, typically this happens when pipes freeze and break, and thousands of gallons can run through a meter and people have no idea. Well, last month we had a commercial user that requested leak forgiveness. And we realized that the original resolution was not adequate. It was not fair to the town in the case of commercial usage, because the original resolution states that the responsible party will pay base rate plus 25% of overage. But for a very high volume user, that shorts the town, because that's less than what their water bill would be in a normal billing period there. So we basically just took the old resolution and added the change that you see there, which is base rate plus 25% of overage, which is fine for most of us regular residential users. But in the case of a commercial user, it would be or the amount of the water bill recorded 12 months prior, whichever is greater. So then we would get an approximation of what they actually would have used, and it would be more fair to the town. And that's pretty much all I have on it. If you have questions, comments.
I noticed that the change in verbiage doesn't address commercial versus residential. So will that apply to residential users also if you go back? I mean, and I imagine it's probably negligible, but.
I think it would be fair in either case.
Okay, thanks.
I thought this seemed like a really good way to address this issue.
I'll make a motion to approve resolution 2022-21, a resolution adopting a refund and reimbursement policy.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Davis.
Yes.
Trustee Granger.
Yes.
Trustee Bierman.
Yes.
Trustee George.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Markey.
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes.
Motion passes with 18 roll call.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John. All right, continued business 9D, resolution 2022-22, appointment of liquor licensing authority.
Okay, so this is almost verbatim, exactly resolution 2019-06. The only real change from there is instead of naming Anthony Edwards by name as a liquor licensing authority, we are changing the verbiage to have the office of the municipal judge liquor licensing authority. So if something happens to Anthony or he has to have a substitute, we still have a valid liquor licensing authority.
Seems like a good
Really, yeah.
That's cleaning up our
organization infrastructure. Here we go.
We're taking Catherine, I think, on the license.
Thank you, staff.
Mhm.
I'll make a motion to approve resolution 2022-22, appointing Anthony Edwards as the hearing officer for the Liquor Licensing Authority.
Second.
No, we don't want to. Oh, sorry.
I mean, to adopt resolution up,
So hold on. So would you like to withdraw?
I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay, cool. Would you like
I
to?
was
make-
reading right from stuff. Yeah, I will make a motion to approve and adopt resolution 2022-22. A resolution of the Board of Trustees of Silverton, Colorado, appointing the municipal judge as hearing officer of the Liquor Licensing Authority.
Second. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Davis. Yes. Trustee Kraniger.
Yes.
Trustee Bierman.
Yes.
Trustee George.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously with anybody.
Like, where do you?
You're
You
here.
now.
Also goes with our liquor license training, which we had, and it's posted online. So if any of our businesses are interested in getting that training, they can go onto our YouTube site.
That's great.
We're clarifying that it doesn't constitute a server training or one of the like manager training that's needed for a liquor license.
When I was at the chamber meeting, they were all very interested in our liquor license. So great.
Okay, and now a very appropriate for today discussion, 9E holiday meetings and a policy relating to when we would or would not have holiday meetings like we are right now.
And so I put a couple of options for you guys to consider. But there is the Francis Xavier Cabrini Day that the state of Colorado recognizes, and it is the first Monday of the month. And potentially moving our holiday to the first Monday of the month for staff or for the town to be closed. So that we're not running a meeting when on the day that we're observing a holiday.
And so my main question here was, how does this relate to our employee handbook and holidays provided for all employees?
So currently we do have today as a holiday in our handbook. So this would be a change to our handbook.
And does staff have a preference on how the schedule works?
We are hoping for the first Monday so that we can keep our meetings consistent on the second Monday and the fourth Monday, but it's ultimately up to you all.
So just to clarify, recognizing the holiday on the first Monday of the month and still having the meeting on the second Monday of the
Correct.
month, even though that's a federal holiday on that second Monday.
Correct. Actually, the state of Colorado, state employees, they only get off the first Monday of the month. They don't get off the second Monday.
Copy that.
So it'd be in line with state employees.
So right now you had today off, but then you got to come in and sit for this meeting.
Correct.
And really today off.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I also had a really fun accounting meeting.
We had a great.
Hospital was closed, but you were still here.
Yeah.
I got a lot of work done.
I'm the holiday.
Yeah, it's like a working holiday.
No, there's no such thing. I support the staff's, preference, or, however it works the best if the state's closed too, but have an actual day off on the first Monday and continue with the consistency of the meetings. But I would defer to staff on this one. If it's of no consequence to the town, legally or any other higher consequences.
Agreed.
Same.
Yeah, I support the staff.
Okay.
Okay.
We don't need a motion, so that should be good. Just out of curiosity, because I'm just learning about the Colorado State process. Post office was closed today, but the post office follows federal and not state.
Correct.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's
Well, here's a fun fact. It's also a holiday in Chile.
Oh.
Two worlds. It's called the two worlds holiday.
What do you do?
Just everything was closed.
Oh.
I mean,
And then you're in two worlds right now. You're in Chile, but you're here in Silverton, so it's
so it's very fitting. Mhm.
apropos.
Well, great, team. That was the last item on our agenda. So now we'll move to the closing public comment. We do not have anyone in the room present besides those participating at this table. And so we'll look to our Zoom attendees. If either of you would like to make a public comment,
Hang it in
please
there.
click the raise hand button. The warriors. Seeing none, we will close the public comment period. I'm just going to quickly note that there's a lot of things happening next week going forward. So on Monday, the 17th, there's a finance committee meeting at 9 a.m. On Tuesday, the 18th, there's a 7 p.m. planning commission meeting at the county courthouse. 9 a.m. on the 20th, facilities, parks and rec at town hall. 3 p.m. on the 20th, library board meeting at the library. 6 p.m. on the 20th. Everybody should come to the Compass Master Plan Community Potluck hosted by community builders in the town. And then on the 24th is our next regular meeting. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. It's 9:26 p.m. Thank you all very much and good night.